Chapter 69. However, one more savior is one more person. I can use this relationship to get to know Lu Zhongqing. I see. It was too dark at that time, so I didn't remember. Is he completely recovered from his cold now? Jiang Pengji's expression softened. There was no trace of joy. Wu Majun cupped his hands and thanked her. Since then, he's almost recovered. If you don't mind, Lu Langjun can call me Zhengzi. No matter how ignorant Jiang Pengji was, she knew that in ancient times, only family members, teachers, and close friends could call each other by their courtesy names. She was so enthusiastic right from the start. It seemed like she had ulterior motives. Because of her temperament, she was not very patient to pretend to be courteous with others. Fortunately, there was Feng Jin by her side who could mediate between them, so the conversation was not that uncomfortable. Putting aside some personal reasons, Wu Majun's temperament was actually quite to her liking. As he spoke, Wu Majun could not help but mention what had happened just now. That Zheng Langjun is not a kind person. You embarrassed him just now. Be careful that he will hold a grudge against you in the future and cause you trouble. It's better to avoid trouble. Lanting can completely suppress this matter just now. Jiang Pengji smiled disdainfully. I have something on him. If he holds a grudge, then so be it. I'm not afraid of him. Wu Majun was speechless. Didn't they say there will be an evaluation recently? If his reputation is tarnished or something happens to him, he might not be able to enter officialdom for the rest of his life. Love go small Shuan net ku instead of hiding his fox tail, he came out to ask for a beating. There's no need to worry about this kind of brain. Hearing her words, Wu Majun could not help but feel suspicious. Did she really have something on Jingbin? The gathering ended on a sour note. Jingbin, who had suffered a great loss, waved his sleeves and left in a rage. The other Langjuns did not show off their talents or try to please the noble ladies. They were all absent-minded. After the gathering ended, Wei Jingxian twisted her handkerchief uneasily. She bit her red lips and asked, did she really say that? Shangguan Wan giggled. Wan said that Brother Lanting isn't a reckless and unreasonable person. He treats Sister Jingxian so well, so he naturally hopes that you can find a good husband. The people at today's assembly, the birds and beasts in human clothing, they are all not good people. Wei Jingxian sighed while her beautiful brows knit together slightly, and she grumbled. If she was a man, then there wouldn't be so many problems. Previously, when he escaped from the bandits' lair and returned home, although his reputation was preserved, his parents still repeatedly questioned him, fearing that he had missed something and would be brought up again in the future. She couldn't help but ask her mother about Lu Shi's womanhood. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that his parents were insiders. Back then, the Lu residents had even come to return the token. It was only out of consideration for her reputation that they had delayed it to this day. As for today's gathering, Wei Jingxian had also expressed her opposition. After all, she and Lu Shi hadn't officially broken off their engagement. Wouldn't this put the entire Lu residence on the spot? Unfortunately, her voice was too weak, and her father had his own plans, so he didn't pay attention to her at all. Mrs. Wei's heart softened when she saw her daughter's sadness. She decided to reveal the truth to her daughter. You don't have to worry about this anymore. Your father told the Lu residents beforehand. No matter how foolish he is, he wouldn't offend Lu Zhongqing at this time. Jiang Pengji had not yet returned home, but the news of what she had done at the gathering had already spread. Just as she had expected, everyone's attention was focused on her archery skills. As for her arrogant behavior, it became a harmless embellishment. Lu Shi was sitting upright. There was a piece of bamboo paper in front of the table. He glanced at it and realized that it was Lu Lanting's birth and 8 characters. Did you have a good time at the gathering today? A father's tone suggested that he was watching a good show. Jiang Pengji complained, it was boring. A bunch of people had nothing to do, so they just sat there and mourned. Their good mood was ruined. Lu Shi almost burst out laughing. Lanting, you're right. This kind of gathering is not a place where you can have fun. It's just that you were too reckless about Jingbin. Fortunately, my son's archery skills are superb. Otherwise, he would have been at a disadvantage. Jiang Pengji sat down at the table in front of Lu Shi and smiled nonchalantly. Could it be that the brat dragged his entire family here to complain to father? As the saying goes, when you hit the young, the old comes. Could Jingbin have gone to his parents for help because he could not beat her? If he did, I would have thrown them out. Plus, they don't have the guts to come looking for trouble. Lu Shi shook his head. In fact, that was not what he was concerned about. I just want to tell you that it's easy to make enemies by humiliating people. If you don't have the confidence to kill them, you should learn to leave them some leeway. Leave them some leeway in life. It sounded like he was advising Jiang Pengji not to be so cruel in the future, but that was not what he meant. The premise of leaving them some leeway was that they did not have the confidence to kill them. If they did, they should be bold enough to make enemies. Lu Shi did not mind dealing with his daughter's aftermath. After all, he was good at it. But time waited for no man. He would grow old one day. Who would be able to help her then? She was still young and her temperament had not yet stabilized. Maybe she could turn things around. Of course I have something on him, Jiang Pengji said gently. Jiang Pengji said gently, I heard that Jingbin intends to enter the officialdom through the evaluation. However, the evaluation not only tests his filial piety, appearance, talent, and family background, but also his reputation. If his reputation is ruined, it will be difficult for him to recover. Lu Shi raised his eyebrows and asked, why do you say that? Jingbin looks like a decent person on the surface, but he has a penchant for flirting with women. He's also extremely violent. I bet he's beaten a lot of kids to death. Jiang Pengji smiled disdainfully. It's not a big deal, but it's not a small one either. If Jingbin had already entered the government, his reputation would be ruined and he would be impeached a few times. But he hasn't entered the government yet, and the evaluation is very strict on his reputation. She did not finish her sentence, but it was good that she knew what she meant. Lu Shi asked a question that he was curious about. How do you know that Jingbin has that kind of hobby? Jiang Pengji answered, I can tell if I'm not blind. Lu Shi rested his forehead on his hand. His eyes fell on the paper on the table. He suddenly asked, if that's the case, what do you see now? Father, you have the smell of incense burning on your body. I've only smelled it at Shangfu Temple because there's a special herb added to it. The clothes I'm wearing are from yesterday. Even though they're very clean, the corners of the clothes have traces of being wet and dried by the night dew. Did you go to Shangfu Temple last night to find Master Liaochen to settle the marriage between me and Jing-er? Chapter 70. Lu Shi listened quietly with a calm expression. It seemed that he had been mentally prepared for this situation. That's all right. What's next? Based on my speculation, it's just a trick. For example, Master Liaochen will tell me that I can't get married in the next few years, or else I'll be killed. Or maybe I'll say that I don't want to waste Jinger's time and ask the Weis to cancel the marriage. Jiang Pengji used the knowledge she had from the ancient times. It was the safest way. In the ancient times, men could marry at a later age, but according to Dongqing's laws, if a woman did not marry at the age of 18, her family would have to pay double the tax. It was naturally impossible for the Wei clan to not be able to pay such a tax, but their reputation would be too bad and it would be very embarrassing. Lu Lanting could afford it, but Wei Jingxian could not. Master Liaochen was a capable man, and he had a high reputation among the nobles in Hejin County. He was a monk, and he never lied. The superstitious and ignorant people of the ancient times would believe his words. After all, they believed in ghosts and gods. Lu Shi listened carefully and said helplessly, that's about it. There's not much of a discrepancy. But you have to know that I'm your father, and I won't guard against you. But what if someone knows about your ability and sets a trap for you? His daughter was smarter, more confident, and more conceited than he had imagined. Conceited people often suffered. Jiang Pengji's eyes were bright, as if there were two clusters of fire burning in them. A one-sided suppression is too boring. Only an exchange of blows can make one's blood boil with excitement. Lu Shi was speechless. He did not expect Jiang Pengji to give him such an answer, but it was a reasonable one. What if one day I'm at a disadvantage? Jiang Pengji smiled. I'm looking forward to it. I'll think about it for the rest of my life. Lu Shi smiled bitterly. I've always wondered why Master Liaochen was so sure that you would become a sovereign in the future. After all, most women in the world are weak and gentle. But now that I think about it, it's not impossible. His daughter was even more manly than a man. Her style was completely different from the rest of the family. Jiang Pengji said, it's better to spread the news of Master Liaochen's fortune-telling as soon as possible. I'm afraid that others will maliciously harm Jing. Lu Shi raised his eyelids, and there was an indescribable look in his eyes. If it wasn't for the fact that he was sure that the one who died that year was the second son of the first wife, he would have suspected that the one in front of him was the son based on what she had just said. You sure have tender feelings for the fairer sex. She openly admitted, being protective of the fairer sex is a virtue, and Jing deserves to be treated well. In a situation where there was no conflict, she had a high tolerance for women, especially beautiful and outstanding women. She had a high tolerance for them. Lu Shi was speechless. It was a pity that he wasn't a son. If that's what you're thinking, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Lu Shi said coldly, Madame Wei has other plans. Moreover, when a woman marries, her family background and her husband's appearance and talent are the most important criteria. As long as she doesn't marry into a lower class and humiliate her family, who cares about how she lives after marriage? There were too many aristocratic ladies who treated their husbands with respect as ice after they got married. The fresh and tender flowers gradually withered in the back of the house. It was because of this that Lu Shi had the audacity to let the daughter of the first wife pretend to be the son of the first wife under the pleading of his late wife. Even after so many years had passed, he still couldn't forget the scene of his wife holding their drowned son as she sat paralyzed by the pond in the courtyard. Her eyes were filled with desolation, as if she had lost her soul and had no attachment to this world. However, her eyes were filled with deep hatred. How could she not hate? Jiang Pengji frowned and asked in a low voice, which family does Madame Wei have her eyes on? Lu Shi asked in reply, at today's gathering. Can you guess who it is? Let her guess. Her guesses were all based on a certain amount of information. If she guessed based on such little information, it was very likely that she would be wrong. However, since Lu Shi had set the scope to that day's gathering, in an instant, all the Langjuns flashed through her mind one by one. Is it Wu Ma Jun? After a while, Jiang Pengji furrowed her brows and said with certainty, but he is not a good candidate. Compared to Wu Ma Jun, it was better to choose Feng Jin. At least Feng Jin was a genuine genius. Not to mention other things, he was a true gentleman. Even if they could not be affectionate after marriage, he would definitely give his wife the respect and understanding she deserved. At least such a man would not pretend that he did not see it and let other women bully his wife. Wu Ma Jun was different. In other words, his heart was higher than the sky, but his life was fragile. Give Wei Jingxian to him. Haha. Lu Shi paused and said, Wu Ma Jun is the fourth son of the emperor. Although he is not favored by the emperor, he is still a prince. Jiang Pengji looked up lazily. She said with contempt, 2 or 3 generations ago, didn't they raise horses for the previous dynasty and live in the stables? It was not that she liked ginseng and rooster or was prejudiced. She had flipped through Lu Lanting's memories. In this era where the aristocratic families were powerful, people valued bloodlines more than anything else. The Wuma royal family had the throne, but their shallow foundation had always been looked down upon by the gentry. Just by looking at the situation in the emperor's harem, she could vaguely see some of it. The crown prince, or the eldest prince, was the son of the empress. The empress was not from a prominent family, but was the second legitimate daughter of a newly ascended aristocratic family. When the emperor married her, he was still Prince Gongshan of Hejin County. In everyone's eyes, the marriage was a good match. The second prince's mother was from a merchant family. In order to please Prince Gongshan, his parents sent her to the palace to be a servant. She also worked hard. Using her pregnancy and gentleness, she slowly won over Prince Gongshuan's heart and made him indulge in her gentleness. Taking advantage of the fact that the novelty had not passed, she desperately got pregnant. She was lucky enough to have a boy in one fell swoop and gave birth to the second prince. She succeeded because of her son. When Prince Gongshan ascended to the throne, she became one of the 3 wives, Lady Hongda. The third prince was not the crown prince, but he had the highest status among all the princes. His mother came from the Feng family. The Feng family was one of the top families in Dongqing. It had been around for hundreds of years and was still standing. There were many talented people in the family. Interestingly, although the third prince's mother came from the Feng family, she was not a direct descendant. She was the daughter of a concubine. She was only a daughter of a concubine, but the current emperor had put in a lot of effort to bring her into the palace. He even gave her the position of Empress. He wanted to give the position of Empress to the daughter of the Feng family, but they looked down on the corrupt royal family and only respected them on the surface. It was useless for the Wuma royal family to be angry. Instead, they had to appease the Feng family to prevent them from being dissatisfied. These aristocratic families had deep roots in the Central Plains. No one knew how much power they could unleash after 1,000 years. As for the fourth prince, his background was more mysterious. There was not much news about him. It was said that he was from the Wang family of Langya. However, no one believed it. Instead, they treated it as a joke. The second prince's background was the lowest, so the emperor treated him as an abandoned son for a marriage alliance with the royal family of the northern borderline. The fourth prince's situation was rather special, but an unfavored and feared prince still wanted to marry the daughter of the Wei family's direct line of descent. Chapter 71. If it was during the founding of the country, it might be possible. But now, if Jing marries Wuma Jun, she will be laughed at. People will say that she gave up her pride to pursue wealth. Unless Wuma Jun's mother has an extraordinary background. It was like the daughter of a noble family marrying the son of a nouveau riche for a generous betrothal gift. It was embarrassing. Wuma Jun's mother and your mother were known as the twin beauties of Langya when they were young. They were 2 famous talented women in Dongqing. Lu Shi's words indirectly confirmed Jiang Pengji's guess. The Wuma royal family and the Wei family are beneath them, but the Wang family of Langya is of a higher status. Jiang Pengji searched her mind. Rumor had it that the fourth prince's mother was from the Wang family of Langya. Was it true? Jiang Pengji didn't have much of an impression of the Wang family, but she vaguely knew that they had a similar status as the Feng family. The twin beauties of Langya? That means Wuma Jun's mother is also quite famous. She's almost as famous as my mother. But how did she get into the harem? In order to get a woman from the Feng family into the harem, the emperor even promised a concubine's daughter the position of Zhao Yi. A woman from the Wang family of Langya had a similar reputation as Gu Min. She must have a high status in the Wang family. How could she get into the harem? I'm not sure, but Wuma Jun is indeed a child of the Wang family. Among the 4 princes, he has the highest status. Lu Shi smiled meaningfully. Even though the crown prince is the crown prince, his mother's family isn't that powerful. The emperor is also wary of him. He hasn't even taught him much about politics. Do you think a crown prince like that is the heir to the throne? Well, there's no point in going around in circles. Dongqing is going to fall. What's the point of arguing about that? Lu Shi's words made Jiang Pengji's mind clear. Wuma Jun is the heir to the throne? If that was the case, it was not impossible for Wuma Jun to marry Wei Jingxian. Lu Shi shook his head. That's not the case. The emperor is really afraid of him. He has been trying to weaken the Wang family in recent years, but he's failed several times. Jiang Pengji was speechless. As a martial artist, she really couldn't understand the mind of a scholar. Noticing the faint smugness on Lu Shi's face, the corners of her mouth twitched uncontrollably. Please enlighten me, father. Think about it yourself. Lu Shi was in a good mood as he left behind the 4 words. Even his facial features seemed to be filled with joy. A comment from the audience in the streaming room suddenly appeared in Jiang Pengji's mind. It feels so exciting to run away after putting on an act. She stood rooted to the ground for a long time, trying hard to suppress her curiosity, and muttered, I'm not curious. The Wuma royal family was like a grasshopper at the end of autumn. Who knew how long they could last? Instead of wasting time thinking about their internal family conflicts, it was better to think about how to get Wei Jingxian out of it. Some of the viewers in the live stream room expressed that they did not understand her thoughts and even felt some reflexively disgust. She was too presumptuous. She felt that Wu Majun was not a good husband, so he was not a good husband. Marriage was a matter between 2 people. Maybe Wei Jingxian and Wu Majun were a good match? As an outsider, what was she worrying about? They were not her parents. What right did they have to say anything? Host V, didn't Monk Liaochen say that I will take the path of conquering the world in the future? The current situation is unstable. Who knows when it will be a complete mess? If that's the case, will the Dongqing royal family still exist? Do you think I will be merciful? The remnants of the previous dynasty had to be eliminated because the roots had to be removed. If Wei Jingxian really married Wu Majun, wouldn't she become a young widow? I can't bear to see that happen. The audience, after a long time, some netizens finally could not help but say something. You can hit me if you don't agree, host, maybe you are thinking too much. Jiang Pengji smiled without saying anything. She did not know if she was thinking too much, but she knew that according to the current situation, the world would be in chaos sooner or later. Others might not know, but Jiang Pengji knew herself very well. She, Jiang Pengji, was never a person who was content with her lot. During peaceful times, she could force herself to be obedient, but if the environment was chaotic, she did not mind stepping in and finding something for herself to do. Jiang Pengji seemed to have thought of something. She picked up the brush and wrote 2 words on the bamboo paper on the table. Even those who did not know calligraphy could see the viciousness and oppression in the 2 words. It was not that she had made much progress, but she had subconsciously integrated her emotions into the words. Jiang Pengji put down the brush and said with satisfaction, Su Ku, frame this and hang it in the study. Su Ku did not know Jiang Pengji well, and he could not figure out his Lungjuan's temper. Therefore, he did not dare to offend her, lest he was punished. However, when he stepped forward to clean up the calligraphy, he could not help but be stunned. A murderous aura hit him in the face. Even though the words were not beautiful, the neat and tidy handwriting revealed its extraordinariness. He could not help but murmur. His face was a little confused. Causing trouble? The words in this era were similar to the ancient words in the world of the streaming room. However, after thousands of years of evolution, the words in the world of the streaming room had become simple. If the words were written properly, they might be able to guess a few words correctly. However, Jiang Pengji's handwriting was like dancing dragons and dancing phoenixes. The audience in the streaming room became illiterate. If Su Ku had not read it out, they would not have known what she had written. You can hit me if you don't agree, damn, the streamer is crazy. Causing trouble. Cough, cough, cough. Whose trouble are you trying to cause? Are you stupid this year? Needless to say, it's definitely not that Qingbin. It's that Wu Majun. One of them put his face forward for the streamer to hit, and after being hit once, he wants to be hit again. The other one wants to steal the streamer's wife. Men can't tolerate this. Tudu Feichio, every time the streamer acts like a tyrant, I can't help but think of a phrase. Xian, D, Tyrant Emperor card. This Chao Diu, ha ha ha, have you forgotten that the streamer is a girl? Even if she wants to shake, it should be a delicate body shake. San Sha Sha, a girl with a big penis and the aura of a tyrant emperor. Poor Taoist, see your chrysanthemum poison, it's so boring. I really want to be pressed down on the ground by the streamer. Harder, even though she had been with them for a few days, Jiang Pengji still could not understand the magical thinking and style of the audience in the streaming room. They were all poisonous. Jiang Pengji secretly poked the system and asked hesitantly, over there. Is it because the evolution of the human brain hasn't been completed? What was so strange about the word, causing trouble? It had been the slogan of the 7th Legion for thousands of years, ever since it was established. The system looked like it had nothing to live for. Others are ginseng roosters. It's just that you don't understand their cuteness. Chapter 72. Hang up the words and kneel in the corridor for an hour. Think about what you did wrong. Just when Su Ku thought that the matter was over, Jiang Pengji suddenly added something that made him freeze. Su Ku held the paper with both hands. He was still angry, but his posture was very humble. Yes. Takshu, who was at the side, did not seem surprised when she saw that. Su Ku's performance at the assembly was outstanding. He had beaten up the gentry nobles, but what was the point? Take this as a lesson. Next time, don't be arrogant and cause trouble for Lang Jun. Takshu walked to Su Ku's side after leaving the study. She raised her eyebrows and looked serious. Any of the nobles at the assembly could have easily killed you. Su Ku pursed his lips and lowered his voice. They were after Lang Jun, but they were not as good as you. Takshu frowned and refuted him coldly. What you did before was to protect Lang Jun from being humiliated or to show off. You and I both know it. Do you still need to quibble? There are many ways to protect Lang Jun, but you chose the wrong one. If you had not stepped on them, Lang Jun would not have been so shameless as to hold a grudge against a servant. Takshu stared at Su Ku, and he suddenly felt guilty. Takshu was right. He had the best of both worlds. He would not let Lu Lanting be humiliated, and he would not let the Langjuns lose face. But why did he have to do it? In the end, Su Ku still could not accept his current identity. He turned his face to avoid Takshu's gaze. Takshu only smiled and said coldly, since you think you are virtuous and well-read, do you know what it means to die if your master is humiliated? In that era, gentry nobles had the right to have private soldiers. That was one of the main reasons why they could threaten the imperial power. The aristocratic families of this era had the right to raise private armies and retainers. This was also one of the main reasons why they had such a high status and could even threaten the imperial power. Lu Shi's reputation in Dongqing was like the sun in the sky. Even the current emperor loved and feared him. Not to mention that Lu Shi's reputation in Dongqing was like the sun at high noon. Even the current emperor loved and feared him. Su Ku had slapped the nobles' faces. Although he had made Jiang Pengji proud, he had also attracted more hatred and grudges. From the perspective of an official, what Su Ku had done before was really a bad idea. In the end, Jiang Pengji had to step in and save him from the danger of having his head split open. If it had been a slightly useless Lang Jun, he would definitely have killed himself today. Thinking of this, his face suddenly turned pale, and the wound on his cheek, which was covered with medicine, began to ache. Takshu and Su Ku each had their own thoughts, but their thoughts were ultimately restricted by this era. In fact, when Jiang Pengji punished Su Ku to kneel, she didn't think that deeply. She just felt that Su Ku, the naughty child, was seeking death happily. If he didn't teach him a lesson, wouldn't his tail be too cocky? Not every Lang Jun had the ability to save the damsel in distress like her. If this kind of behavior was placed in the 7th Corps, how could it be erased with just an hour of kneeling? Without a complete set of hellish training and a few days of sparring with the commander, it would be impossible for him to learn his lesson. It was fine for a young man to be high-spirited, but he couldn't really go crazy. He still needed to restrain himself. After turning off the live stream, Jiang Pengji looked at her plan and was lost in thought. The training of the servants in the village can be accelerated. I need to find something for Su Ku to do as soon as possible. I need to temper his temper. Even if he knew that there was a piece of jade in a stone, if he didn't polish it carefully, the jade would be destroyed. Jiang Pengji still hoped that Su Ku would be an accountant in the future. As she was thinking, she took the time to look at the points of popularity in the live stream account. For the past few days, the room was always full, and there was always an unknown number of people queuing outside. Including the scattered gifts, the points of popularity accumulated were actually quite considerable. According to the contract, the points obtained in the end had to be divided equally with the system. Therefore, Jiang Pengji's account only had 10,034 points of popularity. Later, she carefully studied the contract given by the system. A level 1 streamer, which was the beginner streamer, had a maximum audience of 3,000. If she wanted to increase the limit, she had to level up. A level 2 streamer had a maximum audience of 10,000, but she had to pay 100,000 points of popularity. 100,000 points seemed like a lot, but according to the current speed of the live stream, it was very easy to level up. The difficulty was in the subsequent levels. The difficulty would jump by a large margin, and the number of popularity points needed each time was massive. It was simply a bottomless pit that could not be filled, not to mention that there were other, tempting, treasures in the shopping center. Encountering such a system, there were only 3 words left in her mind: buy, buy, buy. If it were an ordinary person, they would probably be unable to resist the temptation and squander as many points as they had. They might even start to think of other ways to get more points. If they couldn't increase the audience limit for the time being, they would think of ways to make the existing audience pay out of their own pockets. Jiang Pengji disdained such behavior. Because she knew very well that there was never a free lunch in the world. There must be an unknown trap behind a free lunch. She could not cross the bottom line. Chapter 73. The system paused, as if it was thinking about the meaning of her words. Then it tried to dissuade her with a pained expression. Host, based on your current strength, it's not worth it to waste your points on the fusion. Jiang Pengji's strength in her previous life could definitely make her a monster that couldn't be killed, but what was the use of that? In this ancient world, Jiang Pengji could exchange points for more useful skills or items that could make her life better, but she was stubborn and wouldn't listen. Moreover, it was a harem system. The host was going to be the queen. Even if Jiang Pengji didn't agree with it, the system wouldn't give up on the target just because the host didn't want to cooperate. If she could perfectly fuse the strength from her previous life, then, who had ever seen an empress who could poke a hole in the emperor's head with one finger? The scene was too beautiful. It didn't dare to look at it. If you broadcast for a few more days, the system will be able to undergo its first upgrade. At that time, there will be more items unlocked in the shop. You can use your points then. It will help you adapt to this era and live a more comfortable life. Since it was called the multidimensional harem streaming system, it had more functions than what Jiang Pengji had seen. What if she used her points on something as useless as the fusion of strength? What if she needed to buy something in case of emergency? Jiang Pengji understood the system's concerns, but she scoffed at it. No matter what happens, I'm confident that I can handle it perfectly. In her previous life, without the system, she could still rise from a low-level federal soldier to a high-ranking commander. In this life, she had come to an ancient era. Would she be unable to take care of herself without the system's help? The strength belonged to her. Using points to exchange for the fusion was just a fair trade with the system. Due to the limitations of her body's genes, no matter how much she trained, she couldn't recover even 1% of her previous life's strength. Her body was like a glass of water. No matter how much she poured into it, it could only hold 1 cup of water. The fusion the system mentioned was more like optimizing the body's genes. It could change the container from a cup to a water tank. That way, the container could hold more water. Just tell me if these points of popularity can help me recover some of my strength. I don't want to hear anything else. The system was forced into a corner, and could only reluctantly say, you can, but there are too few points, and the fusion effect is very low. Zhong Sunyuan did not dislike this. She also had a faint premonition that if she wanted to fuse all of the martial power of her past life and develop the genes of this body to the same degree as before, the number of points needed might be unimaginable. However, no matter how difficult it was, she still had to give it a try. Sometimes, the system was really too much of an eyesore. It seemed docile, but it always wanted to control her and make her act according to its wishes. Between the host and the system, it seemed that the former was in the dominant position. However, Jiang Pengji tested the system several times and found that it was not the case. At present, the status between them was still relatively fair. It was a cooperative relationship, but what about in the future? The system was so desperate for popularity points that it urged her to start a live stream. What was its motive? He might as well make a bold guess. Popularity points could make the system more powerful. As the host, if he stayed where he was, what would happen then? Her choice conflicted with the system's goal. She couldn't see it now, but once the difference between the two was huge, it would be easy to deal with. Jiang Pengji had never been a puppet who was led by the nose, but she had to maintain the state of being weak even if she didn't want to. Instead of being so passive, it was better to settle for the next best thing and find a way to slowly find the strength of her past life. Jiang Pengji looked down and said, "It's okay. Many a little makes a mickle. Everything has to be done slowly." Seeing that the host was so determined, the system could not force her not to do it. It could only bear with the pain in its stomach and reluctantly agree to her choice. Jiang Pengji heard a system notification sound that was not pleasant to the ear. A virtual screen appeared in front of her. "Host, are you sure you want to use 10,000 points to continue the fusion?" A. Confirm. B. Consider. Jiang Pengji did not hesitate and clicked confirm. The points in her account were instantly emptied, leaving only 34 points. She waited for a while, but there was no reaction from her body. Just as she was about to ask what was going on, a sudden sharp pain came from the bottom of her feet. It went straight to her brain, as if two huge iron nails had been forcefully hammered into her body. Her knees weakened and she almost knelt on the ground. However, that was only the beginning. In less than half a breath, Jiang Pengji's face was pale from the pain. Her forehead was quickly covered in cold sweat. Her lips were a little green, the veins on her forehead were bulging, and her eyeballs looked like they were about to pop out. They were bloodshot and looked extremely terrifying. All the muscles in her body were stimulated and began to spasm crazily. Jiang Pengji felt that she had some difficulty breathing, and she could not help but change her expression. She lowered her head to look at her hands, and the corners of her lips curled into a mocking smile. Her originally thin hands were now in the shape of claws due to the spasms, and the joints of her fingers were distinct. It looked extremely terrifying, and because of the intense pain, she was even slightly out of control. She accidentally knocked over the paperweight on the table and made a sound when it fell to the ground. Outside the study, the maid, Xuanmei, heard the noise and asked softly, "Lang Jun, what are your orders?" Jiang Pengji tried her best to take a deep breath to relieve the feeling of suffocation. She secretly bit the tip of her tongue and let the blood and pain temporarily suppress the spasm of her mouth muscles to avoid suffocation. Her voice was still calm. "Nothing, I accidentally knocked the paperweight to the ground." "Xuanmei, prepare the hot soup." As expected, Xuanmei did not hear anything strange. She respectfully responded and went to order the servant to boil the water for Jiang Pengji. At that moment, Jiang Pengji was in so much pain that she curled her body into a ball. Her breathing became more and more difficult, and her face even turned a little purple. After an unknown amount of time, the sharp pain gradually subsided. Jiang Pengji resisted the pain and did not make a sound. At that moment, she had exhausted all her strength. She lay on the ground with her eyes closed. Her breathing was very weak. After another quarter of an hour, her strength slowly recovered. At that moment, Xuanmei had already returned. She reported through the door, "Lang Jun, the hot soup is ready." Jiang Pengji heard the noise and secretly rolled her eyes. She gritted her teeth and climbed up. She raised her hand and pulled her sleeve to randomly wipe the sweat on her face. Help me bathe. Xiumei carefully gathered her black hair and wrapped it in a handkerchief to prevent it from getting wet. Jiang Pengji pursed her lips. Her pale lips gradually became more rosy under the hot steam. She closed her eyes and leaned against the bathtub. It looked like she was taking a nap, but in fact, she was communicating with the system. Her muscles were sore and swollen. She was too lazy to even lift a finger. Chapter 74. The internet provides you with exciting novels to read. The system said helplessly, I'm sure the host has already guessed the nature of the fusion force. Jiang Pengji nodded in her heart. Although she was exhausted, she was still very alert. Genetic enhancement, she said confidently. If Lu Lanting's previous genes meant that she could only have 5 points of combat power, that limit would be raised after the fusion. The system was going crazy. If the host knows this, then you should also know how dangerous it is. You almost died. To be honest, as a qualified system, it had nurtured countless hosts over a long period of time. In the past, there were hosts like Jiang Pengji who put on a brave front. However, after experiencing the pain of integration, most of them would retreat and choose a gentler and more effective method. As long as you have popularity points, what can't you buy? Jiang Pengji replied with a smile, but she was not afraid. It was painful, but she would not die. If she did not have such knowledge and judgment, she would have died a long time ago in her previous life. Die? Not yet. I think I'm in a good state. The system vaguely had an ominous premonition. Jiang Pengji had said so. Could it be that she had not given up on the idea of continuing the fusion? The system's premonition was right. When Jiang Pengji was stubborn, even 10 bulls would not be able to pull her back. 10,000 points to push the fusion rate to 1%. Jiang Pengji opened the stats panel and saw that the fusion force had gone from +30 to +31. She was slightly disappointed. If she had known this would happen, she would have waited until she had more points before the fusion. Now, she had suffered for nothing. She would definitely remember this next time. The system poured a bucket of cold water on him and said, this is only the initial stage of fusion, so the points required are not many. When the number exceeds the limit of a normal human, the points required will be more than this. Moreover, the risks required for each fusion will increase exponentially. According to the system's calculations, Jiang Pengji's combat power in her previous life was not as simple as breaking through the limit of a normal human. After living for so many years, it was the system's first time meeting such a troublesome and suicidal host. Jiang Pengji's lips curled into a faint smile. I know this better than you. There was no one who understood the pain and reaction of every gene optimization better than she did. In her previous life, she had been a genetic warrior selected by the Federation. Over the past several decades, she had passed through countless life and death situations. Her life hanging by a thread was a common occurrence for her. She had long since gotten used to it. Moreover, in her opinion, the risk was worth it compared to the bountiful harvest. Jiang Pengji looked at her palm coldly. Her heart was terrifyingly calm, without a trace of emotion. The system continued. According to the host's current streamer level, it is impossible for you to accumulate so many popularity points. The live broadcast room of a first-class anchor only had a maximum audience of 3,000. Assuming that the daily audience reached a maximum of 3,000, the fixed daily income of popularity points would only be 1,500. Even if there were some tips, the chances of encountering a tycoon would be very low. However, for the second and later stages of the fusion, the number of popularity points required would increase exponentially. Sharpening the knife will not delay the work of cutting firewood. If your streamer's level can increase by 1 or 2 levels, the points of popularity that you gain every day will be several times or even more than 10 times what you have now. The system could not understand Jiang Pengji's thoughts at all. Why was the host so stubborn? It was only a month's worth of popularity points to increase the level of the live broadcast room. It was a very worthwhile transaction. It thought that she would refute it this time, but Jiang Pengji agreed with it and agreed with it. She said in her heart, "You are right. If the streamer's level does not increase, the speed of accumulating popularity points will be too slow." The system was secretly delighted. It thought that Jiang Pengji had finally been persuaded. However, what she said next gave it a head-on blow, instantly extinguishing all its enthusiasm. Jiang Pengji asked it, "System, do you think a semi-interactive live broadcast or a fully interactive live broadcast is better? If it's the former, the initiative is still in my hands. If it's the latter, although it can stimulate the audience's enthusiasm, it can easily go wrong." Regardless of whether it was a semi-interactive live broadcast or a fully interactive live broadcast, both had a common feature. After the completion of the live broadcast task, the audience would conduct a survey and vote based on their satisfaction with the content of the live broadcast. According to the audience's satisfaction, they would receive 3 levels of treasure chests: gold, silver, and bronze. When the treasure chests were opened, the streamer would receive random rewards. Among them, there was a card that could directly increase the streamer's level for free. If the system could visualize it, its face would probably be as black as ink. "You plan to increase the streamer's level based on looks?" Jiang Pengji smiled faintly. Her dark eyes carried some joy. "You have to believe that girls who love to smile usually have good luck." The system was about to grind its molars. It could not help but complain, "You are really confident in your luck. Girls with bad luck would not be able to smile at all." Cards that could directly increase the streamer's level for free could indeed be obtained by opening treasure chests, but the probability was only a pitiful 1%. It was still the same question. What kind of sin had it committed? How did it encounter such a stubborn host? "My luck has always been good." Jiang Pengji crossed her arms in front of her chest. Her black hair was a little damp and scattered behind her head, which made her handsome face look a little more gentle. "If I'm unlucky, who else in this world can live another life after death like me?" The system was silent for a long time. Once again, it deeply realized that its host was different from the others in the past. "Ha, host, you are capricious." The system could not help but clench its teeth. "If you don't try, you will never know how bad your luck is." Jiang Pengji did not take the system's words to heart. Instead, she provoked it. "Believe me, I am the Emperor of Luck." Jiang Pengji did not know what unlucky or Emperor of Luck meant at first. She had to thank the audience for knowing these words. Every time the stream got a little boring, the audience would use the bullet screen as a chatting platform and chat happily. In the past 2 days, they frequently mentioned words such as unlucky, Emperor of Luck, SSR, and addicted to drawing cards. Jiang Pengji would also read their bullet screen when she was bored. Over time, without a teacher, she slowly understood the meaning of these unfamiliar words. The system was angry. However, when it thought of Jiang Pengji's confident attitude and her previous actions, it felt a little creepy. Could it be that her luck was really that good? If she did not have something to rely on, she would not be so sure that she would be able to increase the streamer's level by looking at her face. The higher the level of the treasure chest, the better the item, and the higher the possibility of getting a free upgrade card. If she really had the ability to get the highest ratings every time and get the gold treasure chest, maybe she could really level up. Thinking of the bright future after leveling up, the system's gloomy mood eased a little and became a little brighter. Life was not just about the present, but also poetry and the future. It should be more optimistic. She knew that second Lang Jun was still the same. He was always so gentle and generous. Takshu scoffed as she watched Sun Mei leave. She was a little disdainful as she muttered softly, wishful thinking. Based on the hearing of others, they definitely could not hear what she said, but that did not include Jiang Pengji. She turned her head and asked suspiciously, "How did Xuemei offend you? I see that you two have a good relationship." Takshu's breathing stagnated. She immediately felt a little awkward, as if she did not know how to answer her question. In the end, she simply gave up and twisted her handkerchief. She bit her lip and said, Langjun is kind and pure, and you've been raised as a man since you were young. How would you know the thoughts of ordinary girls? That Xuanmei obviously has other intentions. She's thinking of seeking a higher position. Looking for a higher place? Jiang Pengji smiled and raised her eyebrows. She lowered her voice and asked curiously, are you saying that Xuanmei has feelings for Su Ku? Su Ku was only 17 years old, but in ancient times, he would have been a grown man who could start a family and start a career. He was not bad looking. Even though his face had been tattooed, it did not diminish his beauty. In Jiang Pengji's eyes, he looked even more mature. Takshu's eyes were a little dazed when she heard her straightforward guess. She seemed to be in disbelief as she patrolled her face back and forth. She was determined to find out something. However, Jiang Pengji's heart was not that easy to pry into. After a while, Takshu gave up. What do you mean by having feelings for Su Ku? You're obviously disloyal. You think that Su Ku is a rare commodity. Even though Xuanmei and I are only Langjuan's maidservants, there are different ranks of maidservants. Langjuan's situation is special. When Langjun turns 20, his status will be even more different. At first, Takshu gritted her teeth angrily. She blushed and skipped over some of the content. Other than the masters of the Lu residence, only Takshu and Xuanmei knew Lu Lanting's true gender. The two maidservants had been handpicked by Lu Shi and his second wife. They had been raised since young and were even more particular about their daily necessities than the daughters of wealthy merchants. They were both smart. How could they not know now if they did not know when they were young? Unless there were some unforeseen circumstances, Lu Lanting's gender would have to be kept a secret. As the two maidservants who knew the truth, their future was clear. When Lu Lanting came of age, they would become her concubines. If Lu Lanting was a man, it would be a great opportunity for the maidservants. They would become the cream of the crop. Because of their friendship when they were young, even if he couldn't pamper the harem alone, he would still be able to gain some favor. Not to mention, Lu Lanting was a soft-hearted and kind person. Even if they had to work for the legal wife in the future, they would not be treated coldly. Unfortunately, no one knew better than them that Lu Lanting was not a man. She was a woman of the same gender as them. It was normal for Xuanmei to have other thoughts. She wanted to find a way out for herself. Jiang Pengji's mind was sharp. Even if she did not know much about the ancient times, she could make some logical deductions. When she connected the dots between Takshu and Xuanmei, her doubts were instantly answered. She smiled and patted Takshu's hair affectionately. Under Takshu's confused and angry gaze, Jiang Pengji teased, Xuanmei's actions are exactly what you want. Now that she's gone, you will be the only one who can enjoy my love. Takshu was speechless. First, her pretty face blushed, then it turned green with embarrassment. When she realized that Jiang Pengji was only teasing her, she instantly realized that she had been fooled. She was so angry that her eyes were bloodshot. Langjun, you're so good at teasing people. Am I a petty person in your heart? Chapter 76. Jiang Pengji almost couldn't hold back her laughter, but she still begged for mercy with a kind voice. It took a lot of effort to quell the little girl's anger. Ahem, let's stop fooling around. Let's be serious. Jiang Pengji coughed softly. Under the gaze of the other party's watery eyes, she said gently, you and Xuanmei grew up together. There's really no need to be hostile towards each other over such a small matter. I know you're feeling indignant for me, but Takshu, both you and she are women, and so am I. I can understand why she did that. Takshu was smart. She instantly understood what Jiang Pengji meant. Her heart skipped a beat. Langjun, don't say anything first. Let me finish. Jiang Pengji raised her hand to stop her from speaking. Her tone was still as gentle as before. I can guess a little bit about father and mother's plans. They arranged it this way because they were afraid that you wouldn't be able to keep your mouths shut and leak my secret. They also hoped that I would have someone useful by my side in the future. However, times have changed, and the situation is constantly changing. Who can predict what will happen in the future? From Jiang Pengji's point of view, it was a sin to let two beautiful flowers wither quietly in order to hide her personal secret. She lived openly, so why did she need to hide? She was proud of her gender and never felt like a burden. He smiled and said, "You and Xuanmei, I've treated you as my family since you were young. If you have someone you like or have other thoughts, just tell me and I'll arrange it for you." It's not easy for a woman to be born. From a young age, they've experienced the feeling of not being able to control themselves. Now that you've come to be my maidservants, I'll protect you and give you the right to do whatever you want. I'll talk to my father. Before Jiang Pengji could finish speaking, Takshu's eyes, which were already red, were now heavy with tears. Finally, she hugged Jiang Pengji as if she had lost her composure. She complained in her neck, "Lang Jun, you promised not to seduce a girl's soul." Jiang Pengji spread her hands in her heart. She was innocent, so she would not take the blame. It was clearly a pure friendship, so why did people always think of it the wrong way? The system, who had witnessed the entire process, snorted coldly and became more and more depressed about the days ahead. Wipe away your tears. If I were a man, I'd be heartbroken. Jiang Pengji smiled and helped her wipe it with her sleeve. Takshu retorted in a low voice, "Lang Jun, do you mean that your heart doesn't ache anymore?" Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows meaningfully. "That's not it. It's all heartache, but in different directions." Takshu was stunned at first. She did not understand what she meant, but she quickly regained her senses. Her exposed skin felt like it was on fire. Jiang Pengji pretended that she didn't see anything. Her expression returned to normal, and she said to her, "As for Xuanmei, tell her about it secretly, so that she doesn't fall for it." Although Su Ku was a good person, he was not suitable for her. Her little tricks won't be able to subdue that person. Seeing that her Lang Jun was sitting talking in a serious manner, Takshu quickly put away the unnecessary thoughts in her heart. She dared not continue to throw a tantrum. She didn't think much of Jiang Pengji's flattery of Su Ku. "Lang Jun, you're flattering him too much." No matter what, Su Ku was just a servant bought by the Lu residents. He was a lowly servant, not to mention the humiliating mark on his face. What about Xuanmei? Although Takshu didn't like Xuanmei's petty thoughts, she wouldn't deliberately belittle her. She was her Langjuan's trusted servant. Her status was second only to the masters of the mansion and the head housekeeper. If she had any thoughts about Su Ku, it would be because Su Ku was of a higher status. However, from what her Langjun said, it seemed that Xuanmei was not worthy of Su Ku. Jiang Pengji smiled helplessly, but she didn't plan to explain anything. Su Ku looks simple and honest, but he is extremely arrogant and self-centered. Xuanmei will easily be at a disadvantage if she follows him. If she hadn't forcefully bought Su Ku, he might have already escaped from the broker house. If the world was peaceful, Su Ku would indeed have a hard time achieving anything in his life. After all, his lowly background was enough to send him to the 18th level of hell. However, the times made heroes. In a few years, the world would be in chaos. Who could guarantee that he wouldn't take advantage of the situation and soar to the sky? Moreover, if she really wanted to cause trouble in the future and Su Ku satisfied her, then it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. After listening to what Jiang Pengji said, Takshu didn't realize that Jiang Pengji was hiding something. She thought that was the only reason. She whispered discontentedly, "Lang Jun is so considerate of her, but she's so opinionated. She's siding with an outsider." Jiang Pengji said, "It's just human nature." As long as he didn't have any intention of betraying her or stepping on her bottom line, she wouldn't care about such a small problem. If he stepped on her bottom line or betrayed her, she wouldn't be so easy to deal with. On the other side, after Xuanmei got permission, she walked to the porch with complicated thoughts. She looked at Su-ku, who was motionless like a clay statue. It was late at night, and the air was chilly and damp. Compared to the warmth of the day, it was so cold that her fingertips were red. She was holding a cloak that she had made herself. The style was simple, and the cloth used was also bought by her. As Xuanmei spoke, she put the cloak on Su-ku. Second Langjun has given you permission to get up. If you continue to kneel here, people will see you. Who knows what they will think of Second Langjun? They might say that she's cruel and doesn't care about her servants. Su-ku was already a little dazed by the night wind. Suddenly, he felt a burst of warmth and fragrance. He couldn't help but look up. He happened to meet Xuanmei's bright and gentle eyes. They were like a clear spring, and he could see into the other's heart with just one look. However, he quickly looked away and didn't dare to look directly at her. No matter how stupid he was, he knew that Xuanmei and Takshu had special identities. In the aristocratic families, they were basically the reserved servants of the young masters. Su-ku was so cold that his lips were a little numb. It's nothing. I made a mistake. I'm reflecting on myself. Xuanmei told Su-ku what Jiang Pengji had said, word for word. After he heard it, his eyes flickered a few times, and then he calmed down. Then, he sighed and chuckled. He said inexplicably, Langjun, you're good. He had Takshu, who was sensible, and Xuanmei, who was gentle and warm. One was hard and the other was soft. The former was ordered to remind him, and the latter represented her kindness and softness. Jiang Pengji's performance that day, as well as her magnanimous way of doing things, was admirable. Su-ku raised his hand to gather the cloak, and he staggered to stand up. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and thanked Xuanmei in a low voice. Lu Shi was the first to hear about what happened outside Jiang Pengji's yard. He was stunned for a long time. It looks like I won't have to use the wolf taming program anymore. Under the candlelight, Lu Shi pursed his lips, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He suppressed the smile that was about to spill out. There were always two kinds of people who liked to make simple things complicated. One was the smart people, and the other was the smart people. Chapter 77. Take a look at this. If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to ask me. Jiang Pengji threw the booklet she had compiled over the past few days to Su-ku. It was filled with training plans she had made based on the situation in ancient times. In order to come up with these things, she had really racked her brain. It was not that the training plan was difficult, but it was very difficult to make it simple. For example, the training she had undergone since she was a child. All kinds of equipment were currently the most popular mainstream equipment, and the training schedule was also constantly changing according to the growth of her physical fitness. There were strict standards for her 3 meals a day, all in order to maximize the potential of her body. However, this era was too backward. There was no specially formulated nutrient solution, no professional training equipment, no suitable training grounds, and even the people who participated in the training were not even as good as the children of her era in all aspects. She had deleted and modified her own standards over and over again to come up with the finished product today. However, in her eyes, the training content was already very relaxed, but in Su-ku's eyes, it was like a sudden clap of thunder. Of course, he wasn't thinking about how amazing Jiang Pengji's training techniques were, nor was he surprised at how exceptional the training plan was. He wasn't even praising Jiang Pengji's prowess. Instead, he was regretting. Did a donkey kick him in the head last night? Why did she feel that the person in front of her was a kind and gentle lord? Langjun, you mustn't do that. Those servants are just ordinary people. This kind of torture, unconsciously, Su-ku voiced out his most honest opinion of the plan. As soon as the words left his mouth, his expression changed. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows. She understood what Su-ku meant, and her face turned green. Wait, he said, torture. The two of them looked at each other. In the eyes of the live stream viewers, they were dumbstruck. Tudu Faccio, #PickNose1. What kind of training plan did the host come up with? Young Su seems to be scared silly. Hong Yen Yun Tian, hahaha, streamer, there's something wrong with this time travel script. Shouldn't the plot be about Su Ku holding the training plan with both hands and being amazed by it, then being subdued by the host's domineering aura, kowtowing to the host and becoming a brain-dead fan? Hit me if you don't agree, you're right. I'm ready to witness the historic scene of the post-starter subduing his underlings. Why did the two of them end up looking at each other dumbstruck? This scene was so King awkward. Looking at the screen full of ha, Jiang Pengji was multitasking expressionlessly. She stared at Su Ku and the scrolling comments on the screen. To paraphrase the audience, if he didn't follow the script, it would be really awkward. Is it really that harsh? She picked up the training book that Su Ku dropped in shock. How could it become the torture you mentioned? Su Ku could hear the gloominess in Jiang Pengji's tone. His heart sank, and he realized that he might have misunderstood her. He deliberated and said, Lang Jun was born with divine strength, and your talent is different from ordinary people. The contents listed above are naturally nothing to you. However, those slaves that were bought are all ordinary people. How can the flesh of ordinary people compare to yours? Seeing him carefully flatter her and then tactfully say that the standards for the content were too strict, Jiang Pengji's gloominess dissipated. In your opinion, what is appropriate? Jiang Pengji's tone was calm, and there was a serious look in her eyes. It showed that she was sincerely asking for advice, and not trying to get even with him later. Su Ku hesitated for a while, and instead of answering, he asked, Lang Jun, why are you spending so much effort? You may have heard from the slaves about what happened to me a few days ago. I don't want to go through that kind of situation again in my life. Training these servants is to find a place for myself to settle down. Dongqing seems to be peaceful now, but even a place like Hejin County is full of bandits. If I don't have a place to settle down, I may be killed one day. As soon as Jiang Pengji finished speaking, Su Ku suddenly shook his head and retorted, Lang Jun, do you really only care about this? If it's just to clean up the bandits and protect the house, 30 to 50 people are enough. Why do you need to mobilize so many people? I'm afraid you have other unspeakable thoughts. Since you said it's unspeakable thoughts, how can I answer your question directly? Su Ku was speechless. He didn't expect Jiang Pengji to be so unpredictable. There was another burst of laughter on the screen, but this time it was not Jiang Pengji who was laughing at her. Instead, they all felt sorry for Su Ku. Hit me if you're not convinced, the longest road that Su Ku has walked in his life is definitely the streamer's unconventional ways. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, young Su Ku, give it a rub. The streamer doesn't care about you, but Auntie cares about you. Carry me away, kiss me. The price of a blue and white *** was equivalent to a lollipop and a lover's heart, and one *** was equivalent to one live stream coin. Badeo President, young Su Ku, don't be lured away by that weird auntie. Come into my arms. Domineering President, tipped 520 kidney apples. One kidney apple was equivalent to one live stream coin. 520 kidney apples were 520 live stream coins. Apart from these two people, there were even more rewards. The screen was full of rewards that almost drowned Jiang Pengji's vision. The backstage notifications came one after another, densely packed, with no signs of stopping. Fortunately, she was expressionless, so no one saw through her. Su Ku didn't know that thousands of people had taken turns to feel sorry for him countless times. His face, which was gradually becoming more determined, showed a trace of a strange expression. His eyes were especially bright and eye-catching. I already understand what you're thinking, Lang Jun. I won't let you down. Okay, you think about it. Seeing that, Jiang Pengji already knew what Su Ku was thinking, but she didn't point it out. Afternoon, you'll go out with me to have a look. We'll have a preliminary plan, so it'll be easier to carry it out in the future. She originally planned to let Su Ku carry out the plan, but now there was a situation, and the standards she set were still too strict. One person is better than two. Su Ku knew the level of ordinary people in ancient times better than she did, so his suggestion was worth taking. According to my initial plan, we should do it step by step, increasing the difficulty of the training step by step. Just as Jiang Pengji finished, Su Ku's heart was sweating profusely. Recalling the contents of the booklet, he couldn't imagine how terrifying the intensity of the training would be if it was done step by step. It wasn't training tigers and wolves, it was clearly training people to death. Chapter 78. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Those with potential are still young, but the older ones don't have enough nutrition, and their overall quality is not good. If they are forced to meet the training standards, they might be lying on the road to training before they become a strong army. However, Jiang Pengji's family was very rich. They didn't have many things, but they had enough food to fill their stomachs. Currently, there were only a dozen or so servants in the farm. She could afford to feed them. I carefully read what you wrote. Although it is harsh, there are some good points in it. Su Ku was worried that Jiang Pengji would be angry, but after careful observation, he didn't see any displeasure on her face, so he plucked up his courage and continued, the so-called elite troops are no less than elite weapons, and there are even more elite soldiers. What are elite soldiers? They are strong, fierce, and good at fighting. Strict discipline, strict laws, and strict execution of orders are the second. In my opinion, the latter is the most important. No matter how strong a soldier was, he was only one person, and he could only exert the strength of one person. But if 100 people acted as one, moved in unison, and exerted their strength in one place, what would the result be? Although every training item in Jiang Pengji's plan was frighteningly harsh, and it didn't seem like it could be completed by a normal person, Su Ku only read it once, but he still found something she emphasized, discipline. Jiang Pengji nodded approvingly. Su Ku's performance was much better than she had imagined. Indeed. I read a novel a few days ago. The content was about a fierce general of the previous dynasty who could come in and out of the chaotic army as if there was no one there. His heroic posture was like that of a god, and the army couldn't touch him. But in my opinion, it is a bit ridiculous. Su Ku was slightly stunned by Jiang Pengji's arrogant words. Although it was only a few words, he could tell who the fierce general of the previous dynasty was, so he was even more confused. That was the peerless general who had followed Emperor Taizu of the Xia dynasty to war, the god of war who had created an extraordinary career, Meng Jing, Meng Ziliang. You don't believe me? Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows. She stood up and took down the bow and arrows. She said to Su Ku, why do you think it's the general who is too brave and not the enemy who is too useless? In my opinion, it's just a normal elite soldier running into a bunch of idiots. If he was a real tiger, wolf, or lion, how could he have fallen into the awkward situation of a group of dragons without a leader and allowed a mortal with a body of flesh and blood to move freely in the army formation? Was it because the horse beneath him was as fast as lightning, and even the arrows couldn't catch up? Or could it be that his body was made of copper and iron and was impervious to swords and spears? They're just a bunch of cowards who have no discipline, no desire to win, and only fear death. Ants could even bite an elephant to death. How could an army of 10,000 people not be able to stop a mortal with flesh and blood? Even if Jiang Pengji was in her previous life, she wouldn't dare to say that she could face tens of thousands of blades and escape unscathed. What she wanted were tigers, wolves, and lions. Those were people who would truly put their heads on their waistbands and fight to the death. Not to mention a general riding a white horse, even a giant riding an elephant would be chopped into minced meat by a flurry of knives. Su Ku's rationality told him that what Jiang Pengji said was too idealistic and too absurd. However, when he thought of the scene of 10,000 people acting as one, orderly, and disciplined, he couldn't help but feel his blood boil. Even his brain began to heat up. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, the young man is done for. Badeo Zhangzi, this streamer is poisonous. She's contagious. San Sha Sha, is Su Ku possessed by a Chinibu? It feels like his eyes are glowing. Nongfu Shanquan Yudiangshuan, I don't care. I just love the streamer who is in the late stage of Chinibu. Jiang Pengji sneaked a peek at the comments on the bullet screen. The little bit of blood that had just risen was instantly extinguished. Instead, there was a sweet feeling of awkwardness and helplessness in her heart. If there was a king who ruined the atmosphere, it would definitely be the audience who laughed all day long. She raised her hand and patted Su Ku, who was immersed in the hot blood, and said in a hoarse voice, "Where was I just now?" Continue, Su Ku. His blood was not boiling yet. It was very inhumane to pat him halfway to wake him up. Did you understand? Although Jiang Pengji said it lightly, it was no different from wishful thinking to achieve that step with the current conditions. Strict enforcement of orders and prohibitions. This phrase seemed to be simple, but it was very difficult to achieve. The first problem was the ridiculously high illiteracy rate in this era. If they could not even fully understand the orders, how could they carry them out accurately? The second problem was the ridiculously low execution rate in this era. As mentioned before, there were as many as 350,000 people participating in a war. The real deciding factor might not even be 50,000 people. What were the other 300,000 people for? Basically, they were there to do nothing, to gain experience and military merits, or to fish in troubled waters, just to fill their stomachs with military pay. If their side won, they would charge forward while they had the advantage of numbers. If they lost, they would turn around and run away. Apart from those who did nothing, the remaining 50,000 elite troops were very unqualified in Jiang Pengji's eyes. They were far from the standard of tigers, wolves, and lions. In the chaos, the elite troops might be able to suppress their inner fear of death and carry out the orders of their superiors. Of course, this possibility was very small. It was more likely that they would take advantage of the chaos to become deserters and only care about their own lives. This was because after the army was defeated, the first to bear the brunt of being demoted was the leader, not the large number of troops. Because of this, in ancient times, the morale of the troops was very important. Otherwise, it would be extremely easy for the troops to be disorganized and unable to recover after a setback. Unless they encountered an enemy who was more dispirited than them, if the difference in the number of troops between the two sides was not big, their side would definitely lose. However, at the end of the day, to put it bluntly, there was only one word: discipline. When a group of disciplined sheep met a group of disorganized wolves, they would win without any suspense. After a deep conversation, Su Ku's eyes opened wider and wider. The way he looked at Jiang Pengji from time to time was a bit fiery. At first, he only thought that she was just an ordinary aristocratic family's son who was greedy for beauty. Later, after the incident at the assembly, she bravely stood up for him. Su Ku labeled Jiang Pengji as quite powerful, arrogant and unruly, and dissolute. After what happened last night, he felt that she was shrewd and seemed to have everything under her control, including people's hearts. Now, his impression of her was refreshed again. If Su Ku had been a little unwilling before, he had now completely put away his previous attitude and understood his position. Even if he was just a layman, just by listening to her talk, he felt that the small military formation she mentioned was very feasible. Indeed, the person in front of him was going to do something big. Dongqing had not completely fallen into chaos yet, but she was already thinking about how to do it. Chapter 79. After experiencing his mother's unjust death and the fact that he almost died of injustice, Su Ku's impression of the aristocratic families had dropped to the lowest level. When he lost all his dignity and was manipulated like a commodity by the human traffickers, he had even fantasized crazily that if he could rise to prominence one day, he would definitely take revenge on those vermin of the country who did not know the suffering of the people and had no regard for human life. However, these thoughts were just thoughts. Not to mention those aristocratic families with deep foundations, even the local gentry could easily control his life and death, let alone the fact that he was now just an official slave. He had gone from a commoner to a lowly commoner, and there was an irremovable mark of humiliation on his face. He had long since lost all hope in this life. However, due to a freak combination of factors, it was bought by this special Lang Jun from an aristocratic family. It was as if a completely different life door had been opened. Su Ku had thought that he was arrogant, and couldn't bear to listen to any unpleasant words, but in fact, he was surprisingly easy to talk to. Of course, Su Ku wouldn't treat this Lang Jun as a harmless little rabbit just because he had taken his advice several times. Not only was the other party not a harmless bunny, it was a silent tiger that seemed to be resting lazily but was actually extremely dangerous. She took his advice only because it was useful. Even so, Jiang Pengji's reaction was beyond Su Ku's expectation. To describe it in modern terms, it would probably be, this young master of the aristocratic family was different from those coquettish wretches outside. He was exceptionally pure and unpretentious. For example, now, he didn't understand. Lang Jun was the only legitimate son of the second branch of the Lu family. According to the gossip of the other servants, the second branch of the Lu family was extremely rich. So, as a noble scholar, how could she know the price of rice, vegetables, and fruits so clearly? He even remembered the prices in the last few days? At most, he would praise Lu Langjun for having an outstanding memory, for having a photographic memory, and for being able to recall what he heard. But, why was he smiling and bargaining with the merchants like an ordinary farmer? That stingy bargaining technique stunned him. He couldn't help but have an illusion that the second branch of the Lu family was so poor that they couldn't even feed themselves. Su Ku wasn't the only one who was dumbfounded. The audience watching the live broadcast were also so shocked that they dropped the melons in their hands. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, what an almighty streamer. She's so cool even when she's haggling. Lan Shui Yubuja, bargaining and whatnot, it feels super down to earth. But host, didn't you notice that he was about to cry? Wujiang Jia Kai Yi, ha 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 ha, the shopkeepers who almost cried when the streamer tried to bargain with them. Hit me if you don't agree, I'm relieved. I'm thankful that the host isn't from this world. Otherwise, it would be too scary. As an experienced clothing store owner, I felt that if I met such a troublesome customer, I would suffer a huge loss. I wouldn't be able to continue my business. A group of spectators expressed that Jiang Pengji was very good at bargaining. Although they felt sorry for the shop owner, they were still happy to watch the show. However, other than the onlookers who only knew how to laugh, there was also Su Ku. Lang Jun, you. Su Ku wanted to say that she was calculative, but that was not a good word. He was also afraid of offending her, so he awkwardly said, "If this gets out, it will greatly damage your reputation." A noble son of an aristocratic family bargaining with a merchant. Even if he maintained his demeanor, it was inevitable that he would have a bad reputation if it got out. Jiang Pengji sneered and said carelessly, "You speak as if I, your Lang Jun, have a reputation? Who in Hejin County doesn't know the reputation of the Lu Manor's prodigal son? The manor does not lack money and rice, but you don't know how expensive it is if you don't manage the household. These merchants saw that I was dressed well, and I was young and ignorant, so they asked for an exorbitant price. They raised a price of 1 copper coin to 10 copper coins. Do I look like a fat sheep to you? Shou Shiguan, how can there be such a cruel sheep like the host in this world?" It was the shopkeeper who was being ripped off. As soon as this comment came out, all the viewers who were watching the live broadcast immediately agreed. That was absolutely right. Su Ku silently looked up at the sky. After that day's fair, the reputation of his Lang Jun had indeed spread, but it was accompanied by the comments of the prodigal son. There were both praise and criticism. However, none of the masters in the manor cared, and the people involved even took the initiative to push the reputation onto themselves. Moreover, if I don't tell them my name, how will they know who I am? Even if they ask, I will only say that my name is Su Xiaoyu, and I am the servant of the Lu Manor's Lang Jun. As soon as Jiang Pengji said this, Su Ku, who was following behind her, almost stumbled and fell. Could it be that his main task in the Lu Manor was not to accompany her in her studies, but to help her Langjun be the scapegoat? After showing Su Ku around, Jiang Pengji asked again, "Have you memorized everything?" Su Ku nodded. Although his memory was not as good as Jiang Pengji's, he still had a photographic memory, so he remembered everything. That's good. In the future, you will be in charge of the farm's expenses and purchases. Make an account book and record everything. You have to be strict with their training. If anyone dares to slack off, you will be severely punished. There will be no room for mercy. If there is punishment, there will be rewards. For those who perform well, you should also be rewarded appropriately. We are still short on manpower, so it shouldn't be difficult to manage. Jiang Pengji bought Su Ku to be the accountant, manage the household affairs, and supervise the training of the servants. One person could take on multiple roles. According to Lu Shi, he would not interfere in this matter, so she had to figure it out on her own. In fact, she did not need others to tell her what to do. Before Su Ku could answer, Jiang Pengji continued, "This is your training and training. Armchair strategizing is just empty talk. If you want to verify your own ideas, you have to put them into practice. You don't have to do everything yourself, but you have to be aware of it. You won't be deceived by your subordinates. Don't think that these purchases are simple. There is more to it than meets the eye." It was the same thing, but the quality was different, and the price was different. It was hard to guarantee that no one would use shoddy goods to cheat him. Don't think that it was a small matter. What if you looked at the bigger picture and the more detailed picture? There were many ways to go about it. For a long time, Su Ku did not say a word. Instead, he looked at Jiang Pengji with surprise and suspicion. His eyes seemed to be overstepping his authority. Jiang Pengji asked, "What are you looking at?" Su Ku felt as if his worldview had been reshaped. His impression of the gentry's son had also been reset. He said gently, "I never thought that you would be so familiar with these household affairs." A gentry's son had a more detailed understanding of the prices of goods than a former commoner like him. He knew the prices of all the shops, stalls, taverns, and eateries within a few miles. Wasn't he the pampered son of the inner house? Heh, you wanted to say that I haggled over every penny. What, you changed your mind in less than a quarter of an hour? Chapter 80. However, no matter how Su Ku thought about it, he did not seem to have said what he was thinking. However, he did not continue to think about it. He only thought that he had inadvertently let the cat out of the bag, so he immediately apologized. "Why do you have to make it so formal?" Jiang Pengji moved sideways and only accepted half of the bow. "Moreover, you did nothing wrong. If what happened just now was spread, people would definitely say that Langjun of the Lus is stingy and harsh." "You are right." Su Ku was right. She just did not care about her reputation. What did other people's words have to do with her? Su Ku said sullenly, "Even so, Langjun is open-minded and open-minded. I don't think you would care about other people's opinions." So, his previous persuasion was just nonsense to Jiang Pengji, and his unspoken criticism was a taboo. Jiang Pengji did not say anything. Her head hurt, so she poked the system. She complained, "System, I feel like the generation gap between him and me is too big. I don't think I blamed him just now, did I? Did he have to act like he was guilty and remorseful?" The system said, This is probably the difference between a gentleman and a hooligan." Jiang Pengji was speechless. Damn it. Su Ku realized that his Langjun was not only familiar with all kinds of affairs, but she was also passionate about carpentry, which others thought was cheap and distracting. She had bought a lot of wood and tools when she went out. Was she going to do carpentry herself? But this time, no matter how many thoughts he had, he did not voice them. He chose to watch silently and wanted to know the deeper meaning behind his Lengjuan's actions. He had a feeling that Jiang Pengji would not keep him confused for too long this time. Sitting outside the carriage, Su Ku looked down. His eyes fell on a familiar place, and he could not help but be stunned. It had only been a few days, but he felt as if it had been a lifetime. That night, he had tried his best to escape from the prison, but he did not expect to be intercepted by Lu Shi and his men. Later, he became Lu Shi's page boy. While they were still on the road, they could see smoke rising from the farmhouse from afar. They could vaguely see the silhouettes of people plowing the fields, a few children chasing and playing, and even a white-haired old farmer sitting at the entrance of the village, smoking from time to time, looking peaceful and leisurely. Jiang Pengji lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked into the distance. The audience in the streaming room could also see the high-definition live stream. "Papa, don't hit me, it feels like my hometown. I remember when I was young, the village was not developed yet. When it was mealtime, smoke would rise from the chimneys of every house. When I saw this, I knew it was time to go back and eat." Tong Hua Shun Yi say, "Yes, yes, yes. It's the same in my hometown. When he was young, he didn't have a kindergarten. He basically let them run around the mountains when he was crazy. But now, there were only a few elderly people in the village. The younger ones had all gone out to work. Rensha Wanka Shoming, I grew up in the city. I've eaten pork, but I've never seen a live pig run." As soon as the topic was brought up, it seemed that the whole live stream instantly entered into a nostalgic theme. They all talked about their childhood villages. "Cutest husky, my village has been greatly improved. There are many small factories built. It's developed, but I can't see the scene in my childhood memory anymore. I can't see the blue sky anymore. The fields are so barren that weeds are growing." Jiang Pengji sat in the carriage with one hand on the table. She was bored and looked at the scenery outside or read the comments to kill time. The coachman drove the carriage skillfully and tried his best to reduce the vibration so that the nobles in the carriage would not feel uncomfortable. Su Ku, who was outside, said in a low voice, "Lang Jun, we've arrived." Jiang Pengji came back to her senses and got out of the carriage. She avoided Su Ku's attempt to help her up and jumped down. For convenience, she had changed out of the fluttering, wide-sleeved cloak and replaced it with a simple and refined brown dress. To be honest, she had had enough of wearing the complicated, anti-human, open-crotch dress. What's the use of tightly wrapped clothes? There was still air underneath. "Let's go," Jiang Pengji said with a smile and led the way forward. The children who were playing saw the strangers coming and ran back, laughing. The audience in the live streaming room felt that the village scene was familiar and warm, but it was a new experience for Jiang Pengji, who was used to cold cities and advanced machinery. It was as if her cold and lonely heart was warmed by the scene. They were dressed very simply. Jiang Pengji wore the brown dress that commoners often wore, which made her look very low-key. Fortunately, the carriage had the emblem of the Lus on it. Although the head of the village had never seen Jiang Pengji before, he knew that the person in the carriage must be from the main family. When he learned that the young man in brown was the second Lang Jun of the Lus, he was so scared that he did not dare to speak. "Relax. I'm just here to see the people who were sent to the village a few days ago. Did any of them try to escape these days?" After asking the head of the village, Jiang Pengji looked at Su Ku, who looked embarrassed. Even if Lu Shi had not sent people to stop them, Su Ku would not have been able to escape from the boundaries of the farm. Jiang Pengji had also sent people to keep an eye on him. The head of the village knelt down obediently and answered with fear. He was afraid that he would offend the Lang Jun and bring trouble to the village. Dongqing seemed to be peaceful, but corrupt officials were running rampant. The gentry in the villages exploited the people. How could the commoners live a peaceful life? Too many people lived in misery. Not only did they have to bear heavy taxes, but they also had to face bandits. In comparison, the tenants in the farm lived a very comfortable life. Everyone in the surrounding villages was envious of them. The main family was kind and had the advantage of money. The bandits did not dare to come and take advantage of them. Most of the tenants lived a happy life. If they did not serve the guests well and angered the Lang Jun of the main family, they would have a hard time in the future. Except for Su-ku, who was taken away, the rest of the people who were sent to the village were arranged to stay in the farm. Because they did not have specific instructions, they did not dare to make decisions. They only sent a few farmers to keep an eye on them in case any of them escaped. It's good that they did not escape. Go and get those people here, Jiang Pengji said to the head of the village and then turned to Su-ku. You will have to work hard for the next few days. Stay in the farm for some time and keep an eye on them for training. When everything is on the right track, you will be assigned to someone you can trust. I will allow you to borrow some books from the study of the Lu's house while you are staying in the farm, in case you fall behind in your studies. Work and study were two different things. Su-ku was still young, so he had to focus on his studies. He could not neglect one thing. A subordinate who could not improve himself at any time was not a good subordinate. Although she did not show it, Jiang Pengji was treating Su-ku like an assistant in the internal affairs of the army in her previous life. Chapter 81. The internet provides you with wonderful novels to read. Jiang Pengji was very clear about her position, be it in her previous or current life. She used to be the leader of the whole army, the core pillar of the army, the belief of all the soldiers, and the confidence of the whole army. Ahem, in layman's terms, she was the mascot in times of peace and the alpha wolf in times of war. She was in charge of the war, and the internal affairs and diplomatic contacts of the army were handed over to her assistants. She was a slacker in one of the subjects. War was her home field, and she was not good at other things. She could not blindly command others, could she? Now that she had given Su-ku the authority to manage the internal affairs and personnel, she naturally would not command others in this area. If Su-ku could not control the situation, it would not be too late for her to intervene. Jiang Pengji and Su-ku formulated a detailed training process and stages based on the principle of making full use of the resources and progressing step by step. The initial training period was not long, and the tasks were not heavy. They were given enough time to adapt. After they had fully adapted, the intensity of the training and other activities would be gradually increased. When they were not training, they would cultivate the fields, work in the fields, or help the other tenants of the farm. In order to stimulate the motivation of the training, they were divided into groups of 5, and each group would select a corporal. The corporal would receive more than half of the monthly allowance than the others. Of course, the corporal was not fixed. There would be a selection every month, and the best performance would win. There was also a competition between the groups, and the group with the best performance would receive an extra half of the monthly allowance. There were rewards and punishments, and the punishments were more severe than the rewards. There was a monthly examination, and the worst performance would be deducted 10% of the monthly allowance, and the training tasks for the next half month would be 10% more than the others. The group with the worst overall performance would be deducted 10% of the monthly allowance, and the training tasks for the next half month would be 10% more than the others. In addition, if an ordinary person made a mistake or caused trouble, the whole group would be punished. If the corporal deliberately caused trouble, the whole group would be punished. These few rules seemed simple, but in fact, they formed a relationship of supervision and restraint between the corporals, and the corporals. The corporals enjoyed more benefits, but they also had to bear more responsibilities. They shared weal and woe with each other. They seemed independent, but in fact, they were one. Jiang Pengji and Su-ku had a detailed discussion about the amount of silver each person would receive each month. After consulting various sources, they finally decided on the amount. Not long after, the head of the village came over with a group of people. Looking at those people's spirit and appearance, they were indeed better than when they were in the broker house. I bought you from the broker house for a reason, not to let you come here to enjoy life. I'll cut to the chase. No matter what you do in the future, you'll have to listen to Su-ku's orders. If anyone tries to cause trouble, don't blame me for being ruthless. Su-ku. Many of the servants had heard of this name and knew who Su-ku was. Hearing this name, some of the bolder ones couldn't help but raise their heads slightly. They found that Su-ku, who was originally just like them, or even more down and out than they were, was now dressed appropriately. His appearance was also more plump than a few days ago, and his spirit was not the same as before. For a moment, many people felt jealous and envious. However, before they could think further, Jiang Pengji's words were like a basin of cold water splashing over their faces. It was a very small scene, but Su Ke's hands were slightly trembling with excitement, and his expression was hidden in the shadows. I'm not a ruthless master. If you're dissatisfied, you can say it. If it's reasonable, I'll listen. If it's unreasonable, then shut up. Jiang Pengji glanced at everyone with indifference that made people dare not look directly at her. She gave Su Ke a wink, and the young man understood and went forward to explain the training in detail. Hearing that they could eat and wear warm clothes every day, and they could get extra monthly silver, those people were all happy. Nowadays, it was not easy to survive in this world. There were natural and man-made disasters that forced people to have no way to live. Hejin County was still prosperous, but some other poor counties were full of starvation and bandits. In some serious places, 9 out of 10 houses were even empty. After they were bought, they found that Su Ke was gone the next day. They were worried for many days, for they were afraid of being implicated by Su Ke. Now that the dust had settled, Su Ke, who they thought had been beaten to death, was standing in front of them. The fierce master in their imagination was actually kind and gentle. For a moment, many people breathed a sigh of relief. As for the training, it was all physical work, so it should not be too tiring. Jiang Pengji saw that they were relieved. She smiled and said coldly, "The Lus don't raise useless people, and the monthly silver is not that easy to get. I didn't buy all of you just to guard the house, and it's not something that can be dismissed with just a few superficial tricks." The young man's voice was mostly immature, but when they heard Jiang Pengji's words, they felt that the air was stagnant and cold. Their backs were covered in cold sweat, and a chill spread from the soles of their feet to their brains. Unspeakable fear lingered in their hearts. Although Hejin County is prosperous, there are also mountain bandits in the nearby mountains. They are evil bandits who rob houses, and they are the enemies you'll have to deal with after your training. You can train carelessly and not take it to heart, and then use this kind of training results to fool me. However, in the future, when you meet those vicious bandits, they will not be merciful because of this and let you live. As soon as Jiang Pengji said that, Su Ke could not help but raise his head to look at her. He was a little surprised. That was not what they had agreed on beforehand? However, the thin, immature boy with his hands behind his back was particularly dazzling under the sun. Not only was Su Ke obsessed with the scene, but there were also fangirls in the streaming room who kept sending gifts. Tudu Feichio, the streamer is so handsome that I can't close my legs QWQ. Jindoos Xianyu is poisonous in the chrysanthemum, I really want to be pressed on the ground by the streamer. Ah, use strength. Yeah. Die. Jinginiang, upstairs, if you continue like this, you will lead the children astray. The system laughed so hard that its eyes could not be seen. The depression it had been feeling for the past few days had all dissipated. It didn't matter if the streamer's style was strange. Anyway, the audience was generous, and the streaming was getting better and better. Ignoring the panicked expressions of the crowd, Jiang Pengji smiled coldly. The Lu family does not raise useless people, and I, Lu Shi, do not need a group of useless people to be an eyesore in front of me. I will give you 3 months. When the time comes, the bandits will die, or you will die. It is all up to you. A wolf that had not seen blood might be weaker than a lamb that had seen blood. Jiang Pengji wanted to train a group of bloodthirsty tigers and wolves, not a group of sheep that could only perform acrobatics. Chapter 82. Jiang Pengji was shorter than everyone there, but her aura easily crushed everyone. Su Ke stared at her. In a trance, he saw a fierce tiger with a strong body. Blood and flesh hung from the corners of its mouth. Its muscles were tense, ready to strike, and it was staring at its prey. Her eyes were fierce and cold. Being stared at by her, it was as if he was already destined to die. When he came back to his senses, the other party was still a young man bathed in sunlight. His black hair reflected the light, and there was a halo around him. After a while, although everyone was trembling in fear and their teeth were chattering, no one had the courage to raise any objections. The corners of Jiang Pengji's lips curled into a cold smile. She squinted her eyes, revealing her slender and long eyes. A trace of mischievousness and interest flashed across her eyes. Since there are no objections, let's begin. She raised her hand and threw the sandalwood fan in Su Ku's direction. Su Ku instinctively reached out to catch it. The familiar fragrance on the fan made his whole body tremble. He subconsciously thought of Lu Shi's cold and venomous eyes that night. It couldn't be helped, he had been traumatized. No, now was not the time to be afraid. His Lang Jun had said to start. What start? Was this part of the process set up at the beginning? Before the confused Su Ku could figure out what start meant, Jiang Pengji's next words almost scared him half to death. Jiang Pengji said leisurely. Su Ku's heart skipped a beat. I will choose the first batch of sergeants. I will be fair and impartial. She continued, I know that some of you are already thinking of retreating, afraid that you will lose your life in the hands of a ruthless bandit. However, the indenture that concerns your lives is in my hands, so you don't dare to act rashly. Now, I will give you a chance. Whoever defeats me, I will release their indenture, return their freedom, and give them a year's worth of silver. After a long time, Su Ku's deepest impression of Jiang Pengji would be the image of her curling her thin lips and shining eyes under the afternoon sun. Come at me one by one, or all at once. You don't have to be restrained. Life and death are up to fate. It's all up to the will of heaven. As soon as she said that, the crowd became restless. They didn't expect Jiang Pengji to be so arrogant. They were all children of poor families. They had been working in the fields since they were young, so they were naturally strong. Even though Jiang Pengji was the son of the noble first wife of the Lu family, and she might have trained with a martial arts master to strengthen her body, but she was thin and weak. She looked like a chicken without much meat. No matter how you looked at it, she couldn't be compared to them, could she? If he won against her, he would be able to get back the indenture and even get a year's worth of silver? Was there really such a good thing? Everyone looked at each other in dismay, their steps hesitating. No one dared to take the lead, fearing that this was just a trap to test them. Su Ku was anxious. He wanted to pull Jiang Pengji back, but he was afraid of offending her. If he did nothing, what would he do if she was injured by those reckless men? To be more serious, what if he was beaten to death by random punches? His heart was restless, as if there was a small tongue of fire licking his heart, causing him to feel even more anxious and tormented. However, in the next moment, he inadvertently saw the smile on the corner of her lips. Her eyes revealed a look of anticipation. Su Ku suddenly stopped in his tracks. He couldn't help but think of that day at the gathering. Jiang Pengji had also teased the crowd in the same way. There was a look of disdain in the depths of her eyes. That was a signal, she didn't take her opponent seriously at all. Thus, he silently stopped. The atmosphere became more and more stagnant. Everyone felt as if there was a layer of seemingly thin, but in fact, extremely heavy stone pressing down on their hearts. It made them inexplicably nervous. Their breathing was heavy and hurried, and their backs were sweating profusely. It was as if they were bearing a weight that they couldn't bear. None of you dare? Jiang Pengji spoke appropriately. She picked a sensitive time when the pressure in everyone's hearts had reached its limit. As soon as she finished speaking, an adult man with slightly red eyes dashed out of the crowd. He was the most muscular of all the servants, and he was also the strongest. He waved a fist that was as large as a boulder and directly attacked Jiang Pengji's face, bringing with it a strong gust of wind. Finally, there's someone with guts. Jiang Pengji laughed softly. She didn't care about the fist at all. The head of the manor was already so scared that his chest was beating wildly. He almost couldn't keep up with the rhythm of his breathing. Su-ku couldn't bear to look at it, so he tilted his head to avoid eye contact. Everyone in the streaming room subconsciously held their breath and clenched their fists slightly. At that moment, some people were complaining about why the streaming screen was so high definition. It made them feel as if the fist would break through the screen and directly hit their faces. Some of the more timid ones were even mentally prepared for the streamer to be splattered with blood on the spot. Many streamers liked to do things that courted death in order to attract popularity. They didn't expect Jiang Pengji to follow in their footsteps. Among the people present, the ones who were least worried were the minority of the streaming audience who had seen Jiang Pengji's valiant fighting ability. While everyone else was trembling with fear, they were the only ones who were excited and opened their eyes wide, afraid that they would miss any exciting moment. Good move. Faced with the menacing fist, Jiang Pengji didn't dodge. Instead, she took a step forward and directly met the opponent head-on. She used her side palm to block the opponent's wrist and offset most of the force. Then she used her palm to shake off the opponent's wrist. She opened her palm wide and grabbed the opponent's arm. She turned around and used the opponent's strength to fight back. Her movements were simple, but she used the force to the extreme. After all, these were the servants who had to be trained. She couldn't just punch them until they were unconscious. Who would train them if they were lying on the mattresses moaning and moaning? Therefore, Jiang Pengji only wanted to teach them a little lesson. She just needed to beat them until they were completely convinced. The seventh corps was bellicose. Not only was their slogan, "Cause trouble," but they also had some bad habits that outsiders thought were very rude. Every year, 99% of the new recruits had to go through the recruit baptism. To put it bluntly, it was to go against the veterans and then be ruthlessly beaten up. Young people were always hot-tempered. They had to be beaten up. Otherwise, it would be difficult to discipline them in the future. Similarly, these servants each had their own thoughts. They might not take training seriously in the future, so they deserved to be beaten up. Instead of worrying about this problem in the future, it was better to beat them up now. For Jiang Pengji, there was nothing in this world that couldn't be solved with a good beating. If there was, she would beat them up again. The servant who was the first to act was like a signal. It made the hesitation in the hearts of the others dissipate instantly. Taking advantage of their momentary courage, they pounced on Jiang Pengji. They had the advantage in numbers. Were they afraid that they couldn't beat a young and weak Langjun from an aristocratic family? They didn't ask for anything else. They didn't want to beat her to death. After all, if they killed her, they would be buried with her. They only wanted to win against Jiang Pengji. As long as they won, she had made a promise in front of everyone. They dared not go back on their words for the sake of their pride. Chapter 83. The internet provides you with wonderful novels to read. More than a dozen people couldn't even touch the hem of Jiang Pengji's clothes, let alone cause her any trouble. They had no combat discipline, no sense of cooperation, and no tactics to speak of. They only knew how to rush around like headless flies. Not only could they not exert the strength of 1 + 1 = 2, but they were also holding each other back. Jiang Pengji had no difficulty in dealing with them. Corpses were constantly being thrown to the ground with dull thuds. Su-ku opened his eyes slightly and saw Jiang Pengji in a plain brown robe strolling among the crowd. Her movements were simple, but she had the demeanor of a master. "I've never seen anyone weaker than you. You want to suppress bandits? Why don't you go buy an embroidery brush and stay in the house to learn how to do needlework? With this kind of ability, if I take you to suppress bandits, you won't even be enough to kill one person." Jiang Pengji had perfect control of her strength. She didn't injure or cripple them. However, they wouldn't be able to stand up and fight with her for a while. His venomous tongue was unleashed, stomping on wherever it hurt. The men were red in the face, as if living in the world was a waste of food, and committing suicide out of shame would pollute the land. "Look at you. You're all so weak. Your legs are like noodles. You can't even stand straight. You'll fall if you stumble. You'll lie on the ground and wail for a long time. Did you not eat enough during the day? Or did you lose your body on a woman at night? Or did you sleep too much in bed? Jiang Pengji sarcastically said. She never paid attention to her limits, so she inadvertently used dirty words. Su Ku, a young boy, blushed. He looked at Jiang Pengji as if he was looking at a monster. How could such vulgar words come out of the mouth of a noble Lang Jun who was raised in a noble family? Jiang Pengji acted as if nothing had happened to Su Ku. She didn't think what she said was wrong. Was this standard vulgar, dirty, and violent? Then what about the fact that she had drunk alcohol and won the championship of the Dirty Stories competition? She tried to use elegant words to express herself. The system, which had been happy a moment ago, was now paralyzed on the sofa and couldn't take care of itself. With such a host, it was already a salted fish. The bystanders were dumbstruck, but there was a group of people who were so excited that they couldn't stop. Notifications flooded the screen, flipping page after page. Domineering President, rewarded 1314 kidney apples. Viewer, come and hit me if you're not convinced, rewarded 11 sets of 520 blue and white side items. Viewer, stupid network card crippled, rewarded 99 blue enchantresses. The most eye-catching thing was a huge firework that exploded on the virtual screen. The cool special effects almost occupied the entire screen. It stopped abruptly. It was hilarious. The system wailed, host, that's a total of 9,000 points of popularity. You can get it just by dancing. Jiang Pengji sternly stopped it. Shut up. At the same time, a bullet screen notification was posted in her mind. Host V, thank you for the love and enthusiasm of the audience, but the live broadcast room refuses to accept any content of the designated live broadcast mode. It's a matter of principle and has nothing to do with anything else. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jiang Pengji briefly explained the voting rules for the semi-interactive mode and the fully interactive mode. Although the live broadcast without a clear theme was very interesting, it also lacked a sense of anticipation. After a long time, people would get tired. Moreover, there was no guarantee that interesting things would happen every time the live broadcast was free. Sometimes she felt that her days were boring and moldy, not to mention the audience sitting in front of the screen watching the live broadcast. The novelty of the live broadcast room could maintain the curiosity in their hearts, but it could not sustain their passion. Although Jiang Pengji was expressionless and there was no flaw in her eyes or expression, Su Ku, who was beside her, sensitively noticed that his Lungjuan's good mood was inexplicably covered with a layer of dense fog. She seemed to be extremely unhappy. Could it be that Lang Jun was extremely disappointed in the people lying on the ground? Su Ku could not help but think more, but before he could figure it out, Jiang Pengji had already stepped forward and taken away the sandalwood fan that he was keeping. You make arrangements for these people. We will go back to the mansion to discuss this at night. We will officially start training tomorrow. If they are still so useless, there is no need to keep them and waste food. Jiang Pengji's face was cold and stern, as if she was suppressing some kind of emotion. It made people subconsciously lower their heads, not daring to make a sound. Chapter 84. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. For some unknown reason, Lu Shi trusted and indulged his daughter. Apart from her studies, he rarely interfered with anything else. However, he still wanted to know the details. He was afraid that she would be taken advantage of. Obviously, Lu Shi's worry was unnecessary. How could Jiang Pengji be taken advantage of? Su Ku was a busy man. First, he made arrangements for the servants in the farm. Then, he came back and had a heart-to-heart talk with Jiang Pengji. Before he could eat a hot meal, he was called over by Lu Shi, the head of the family. Because of the fear, Su Ku did not hide the details. He was eloquent, and his narration was clear. Lu Shi sat at the head of the table and listened with his eyes closed. He seemed to be enjoying it. Behind the screen, Madame Hu smiled. Erlang has really made a name for himself. Cousin can feel more at ease now. His daughter was praised, but as the head of the household, he could not be too proud. He could not hide his smile, but he still had to be humble. However, when Su Ku told her about how Jiang Pengji had provoked many of the reservists and said that she would send them to exterminate bandits after the training, Madame Hu was so shocked that she almost threw the snack back onto the plate. Lu Shi opened his eyes abruptly, and there was a hint of astonishment in his eyes. Madame Hu could not care less about her elegance. She said sternly, "A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall." How could Erlang be so impulsive? In this regard, Lu Shi did not say anything. He only had a look of realization on his face that others could not understand. No one knew what he was thinking. Madame Hu's angry voice did not reach his ears. He felt like he was floating, as if he was in another dimension. After a long time, he gathered his thoughts. His face was pale. "All right, Lanting is no longer a 3-year-old. You know what you're doing." Lu Shi interrupted Madame Hu's order to stop Jiang Pengji. There was tiredness and an indescribable sharpness between his brows. Maybe this is fate. He went straight back to the main courtyard. The candlelight in the corridor flickered and flickered, elongating his shadow. Sitting in front of a few tables, Lu Shi spread out a great universal geographical map of Dongqing. A place was clearly marked on it. It was Hu County, which Lu Shi had once governed. He stared at Hu County for an hour, clenching his fists so tightly that a few crescent moon marks were left on his palms. After a long time, he said to the maidservant waiting outside the room, "Go and invite Lanting here." In ancient times, people worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Jiang Pengji was ready to go to bed with the help of her maids. "Let's go. Don't let father wait too long." She suddenly received a message from Lu Shi. She frowned and got up to take the warm and heavy cloak from Takshu. She put it on. She didn't know if it was because Lu Shi had returned, or if it was because of the revival of spring, which had injected vitality into the desolate Lu mansion. The landscape in the courtyard was a lot more luxuriant than when she had first arrived. It was just that the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The light was dim, and the scenery was flickering. It was rather strange. When she reached the main courtyard, she bowed to Lu Shi. He waved at her and said gently, "Lanting, come forward." She took a few steps forward and sat down beside the table. She found her father staring at a great universal geographical map of Dongqing. Although it was a great universal geographical map, it was actually quite simple. Not to mention the rivers and mountains, even the size of the map was drawn in a mess. "Lanting, do you know where the county I was in was?" Lu Shi pushed the lamp on the table toward Jiang Pengji so that she could see more clearly. "I've been away from Hejian for the past few years. I've wondered if Lanting has any resentment. But I had no choice but to temporarily leave my homeland and my children." Jiang Pengji looked up at him suspiciously. She didn't understand why Lu Shi suddenly brought up this topic. "Father, you were in this place. It's called Hu County, but it's as big as a prefecture." Jiang Pengji answered the first question and avoided the second one. After all, she was not Lu Lanting. She was in no position to answer, and she couldn't give an answer. Lu Shi caressed the Hu County on the great universal geographical map with his fair fingertips. "Yes, Hu County. Before I took office, it was a famous barren land in Dongqing. The government sent many high-ranking officials there, but they all died halfway or in office. It was a place of no return. It was not a bad thing to say that Hu County was barren. Since the end of the Xia dynasty, it had been a hard bone to chew. The land was vast, but it was overgrown with weeds. There had been a continuous drought for 10 years without a single drop of rain, which made it difficult for every household to survive. To survive, every able-bodied man in every household became roving bandits. They looted everywhere and sold their children. Those who had the means to escape from Hu County early. Even if they were worse off than pigs or dogs, it was better than being tortured in the hell that was Hu County. Not only that, but the disaster relief silver and food distributed by the court were exploited and bullied by the gentry. When they reached the hands of the people, they were left with rice mixed with 99% soil. It was the same every year. The gentry ran amok, the officials protected each other, and the roving bandits ran rampant. After the fall of the Xia dynasty, Dongqing took over the hard bone. Before Lu Shi, there was no lack of righteous officials who wanted to govern, but there was no exception. They all died. As a result, Lu Shi became the longest-serving county chief in Hu County. He was even worshipped by the local people as a god. What happened to you, father? Why were you sent to such a dangerous place? Jiang Pengji frowned. Hu County was notorious. Any young man who knew his place would not go to such a place to be an official. Wasn't that courting death? The Lu family was not considered the top family in Dongqing, but not everyone could look down on them. They should have connections in the bureaucracy. Lu Shi's answer was beyond Jiang Pengji's expectation. I was willing to go to the edge of death to survive. Willing? He was willing to die. Or could it be that Lu Shi was certain that he would survive in Hu County? No, he was willing to go to the edge of death to survive. Was there really someone who wanted to kill Lu Shi? To others, Hu County is a place where death is certain. But to me, it is a blessed land that contains a sliver of hope. Lu Shi sighed with emotion. In his mind, he was dressed in sackcloth. He was grief-stricken as he hurried on his way with Amin's memorial tablet. At that time, he had lost his son twice. Then, his beloved wife was seriously ill. He was getting weaker day by day. There were all kinds of murderous intents staring at the small Lu residence. He was the only child left in his arms. He was at a loss. When he was at his most depressed, he even wanted to die. But Amin was right. Lanting was still alive. His enemy was still alive. He could not die yet. He only had a glimmer of hope when he went to Hu County. They can secretly pay attention to the movements of all parties, and they can also monitor the movements of the squires and officials. In short, the entire Hu County should be gradually devoured. Jiang Pengji's thoughts had not been thought through. It was just her first reaction. After fighting for so many years, it had become an instinct. They prioritized using force to solve problems. Hu Commandery was a tough nut to crack. If they weren't ruthless, they wouldn't be able to subdue them. Although the second branch of the Lu family was rich, they could not fully support the military. Therefore, it was a good way to save money by feeding on the enemy. Lu Shi's eyes grew brighter as Jiang Pengji spoke slowly. She pretended not to see it and lowered her eyes. Hu Commandery is so poor because of two reasons: man-made disasters and natural disasters. Man-made disasters can be solved, but natural disasters are not. Lu Shi seemed to have let go of something. He smiled and asked, "But Lanting, you seem to have a plan." I have observed that one of the reasons why Hu Commandery is so poor is because of the drought. Most of the fields are dry and crops cannot grow. Jiang Pengji gestured to Hu Commandery on the great universal geographical map. However, Hu Commandery is a land of flowing water. Jiang Pengji had carefully read through the information Lu Lanting had collected. The girl seemed to be obsessed with becoming a man like her father. But the problem of Hu Commandery was right in front of her, and she could not figure it out. She did not know where to start. It was not a difficult problem for Jiang Pengji. As a genetic warrior, she had to adapt to different environments. She had to learn everything related to combat. Who knew, she might be able to survive one day. She had even been trained to survive in the wilderness. She had been thrown into the abyss of death unarmed. There were 1,000 people who had participated in the training, but she was the only one who had survived. It was not a suitable place for humans to live. Humans needed food, air, and water. Apart from the general knowledge she had learned from books, the rest of her knowledge was accumulated through life and death struggles. Combined with the culture and customs of Hu Commandery, there were many descriptions of mountains and veins. She found some clues. Of course, underground water cannot alleviate the drought in Hu Commandery. Jiang Pengji's finger moved to a large river near Hu Commandery. It was known as the Mother River of Dongqing, but the river's embankment had collapsed all year round. Hu Commandery lacked water, but some places had so much water that people could drown. It was hard to say which was more fatal, flood or drought. It was a choice between dying of thirst or drowning. No matter which one was chosen, they would die. It was just that the method of death was different. The people born in Dongqing were unlucky. They did not have a single moment of peace in the whole year. First, dig underground water. After the disaster is alleviated, gather the people and use manpower to divert the water from the branch into the river in Hu Commandery. The main river could not be moved easily. If there was another flood and the river erupted, Lu Shi would be the one to blame. But it was not a problem to divert the water from the branch. It could reduce the work and shorten the time. Moreover, the branch was closer to Hu Commandery. Lu Shi smiled and asked, "This plan is feasible, but how can the people bear the burden of corvée labor?" Corvée labor was, to put it bluntly, unpaid manual labor. It was heavy and often resulted in murder cases. Moreover, it was difficult to motivate the people. Jiang Pengji thought about it and said, "What's so difficult about it? Promise the people some compensation and that they will be responsible for 3 meals of coarse grain. Also, promise that when the project is completed and the land is reclaimed, the government will provide farming tools and cattle. Every household will be able to reduce or exempt their taxes." With compensation, how could the people's enthusiasm be the same as free labor? Monetary compensation was the motivation and direction to move forward. Hu Commandery was a strange place. Dongqing had little control over it and all the laws were just lip service. If Lu Shi could settle down in Hu Commandery, it would be easy for him to reduce or even exempt taxes for a few years. It was a good deal to use the court's order to do him a favor. The people's reputation would belong to him. Lu Shi asked, "Such a huge project will require an uncountable amount of money. Where will the money come from? What's more, corvée labor has its own rules. If we really implement it, not only will we have to face the pressure of not having enough money, but we may also be impeached." Chapter 86. Jiang Pengji smiled faintly. She was cunning and said, "The officials love the people like they are their own children. Why can't they pay for it? The law doesn't punish the masses. The imperial court can't save the people, so why can't the people in Hu County save themselves? To put it bluntly, it was robbing the rich to help the poor. Opportunities are created by people. You'll only suffer if you stick to the rules." Her eyes flashed with interest. Those rural gentry clans that have been entrenched in Hu County for hundreds of years are all filthy rich. How can good people like them be absent when it comes to benefiting the people? Aren't pigs fattened so that they can be slaughtered and eaten during the new year? They could always get something out of slaughtering them. As for how to make those pai shio spit out the money and rice, it's simple. Hu County does suffer from drought every year, but the root cause of the current situation is man-made. The imperial court provides relief money every year and reduces taxes every year, but what's the result? Natural disasters were scary, but the people's hearts were more frightening when they fought among themselves. They could resist natural disasters if they were united, but the man-made disaster was the reason why Hu County went from a chaotic and impoverished Xia dynasty to Dongqing. Let's not talk about this. Just look at the relief money allocated every year from the previous dynasty to Dongqing. It's definitely a huge loophole that can't be filled. Who ate it? Is there still any doubt? If those people don't want to spit out what they ate, we can only resort to extreme measures. Whether it's falsifying accounts or pretending to be bandits, exterminating the family and confiscating the property, there must be a suitable method. The former method could at least save their lives, but the latter would be exterminated. There's nothing in this world that can't be solved with a knife. If there is, I'll do it again. Jiang Pengji squinted her eyes as she spoke. Her lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile, which was indescribably beautiful. It would be best if there was evidence, but if there was no evidence, she could only fabricate it. Extraordinary times called for extraordinary actions. Even a gentleman couldn't rigidly adhere to the rigid rules. If it didn't work, she could publicize it to the people. She didn't have to do anything. The seething resentment would drive people to their deaths. To put it bluntly, if he wanted to govern Hu County well, he couldn't rely on being a gentleman. He wanted to be as much of a hooligan as he could be. If they were evil, he needed to be even more evil than them. If they didn't agree with him, they would start fighting and killing. However, to achieve this, the public must have a high reputation, and they must have a military force that the officials and gentry are afraid of. Otherwise, it will be extremely easy to die on the spot. What Jiang Pengji said was built on the foundation of absolute military force. If Shi wanted to heal Hu County, he would inevitably anger the local tyrants and harm their interests. Men die for wealth, and birds die for food. It was extremely normal for him to kill Shi for his own benefit. It's not difficult to stay alive. Establishing a firm foothold and governing Hu County complement each other. Jiang Pengji's mouth was dry after saying so much. She secretly licked her dry lips with her tongue. Her eyes were bright and spirited. What did father do back then? She smiled shyly. Just like my son. In other words, he had used the methods that Lanting had used, but he was not as ruthless and decisive as she was. The methods he had used against the local gentry in Hu County seemed ruthless, and they had even given him the title of King of Hell behind his back. However, compared to Lanting, his methods were tame and kind. No matter how ruthless Shi was, he had at least let the gentry survive. Lanting, on the other hand, had surrounded the residence of the gentry. She had killed every living thing in the residence. Not even a bird or a chicken was spared. Almost all the gentry in Hu County, except for those who had defected early on, had been killed by her. She looked at Jiang Pengji with a complicated expression. Even though she did not look murderous and her eyes were clear, he was sure that she was not joking. Thinking of this, Shi muttered, "But Lanting, you've forgotten something very important." Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows. Her plan had been improvised, so it was normal for it to have loopholes. She had always been conceited, so when she heard that Shi's plan would not work, she became interested. "Father, please advise me." Shi did not speak. He wrote 2 words on the table with his index finger. Jiang Pengji's face darkened. He said, "Your plan is feasible, but have you ever thought that you will offend all the gentry clans by doing this? In today's era, insulting the emperor in public was worse than insulting the aristocratic families. The gentry clans were powerful. Jiang Pengji's plan could solve the problem in Hu County, but what should he do next? Put himself in a hostile position with all the gentry clans? What's more, most of the talented people nowadays come from the aristocratic families. Shi stopped here and changed the topic. It's rare to see a few people from poor families. If we do as you say, have you ever thought about the consequences of being ostracized by them? In today's era, most of the resources were given to the gentry clans. They had a lot of money and knowledge, and the ratio of talents they nurtured was much higher than that of ordinary people. Innate talent was important, but so was the environment and education. If she offended all the gentry clans according to her plan, who would be willing to work for her if she rebelled in the future? Jiang Pengji's face darkened. She raised her head and looked at Shi. There seemed to be an undercurrent in her dark eyes. "So what do you think we should do, father?" Jiang Pengji asked deliberately. Shi said bluntly, "We can't offend them completely. They could be offended, but they could not become irreconcilable enemies. It was important to leave some leeway for others. Jiang Pengji pursed her lips and thought for a while. In the end, she said, it is better to get rid of future troubles than to keep them around. There was nothing that could not be solved with a knife. If there was, then another knife. It was the same no matter who came. Lu Shi looked at Jiang Pengji with a complicated expression. After a long time, he let out a long sigh and said, Lanting, I don't care what you're thinking or what you're going to do, but you must think twice before you act. Think about yourself and your family. After all, she was the second legitimate son of the Lu family in Hejian. With his reminder, Jiang Pengji reacted and responded, I understand. Lu Shi did not dare to think about whether or not Jiang Pengji had really listened to him. Chapter 87. Forget it. Let's not talk about such a depressing matter. Lu Shi cut the conversation short. He did not want the father and son to get into an argument over something that did not even exist. Not to mention anything else, but his daughter's answer just now made him extremely satisfied and even proud. Emperor Chen of the Jiang dynasty was not to be underestimated. Lu Shi's expression did not change, but he had been thinking about it. Jiang Pengji secretly frowned and said, Father is at home now. He should rest well. It's better not to worry too much. If that's the case, I'll listen to you. Lu Shi smiled and shook his head. I suddenly feel like eating egg custard. Jiang Pengji said coldly, I'm not good at cooking. In fact, Lu Lanting's current body did not even know where the kitchen was. Jiang Pengji was used to eating all kinds of nutrient solutions. She did not mind stuffing them into her mouth as long as she could eat them. Survival was the most important thing. As for the only thing that was related to cooking, it was barbecue. In that case, I'll cook for Lanting. Let's have a good drink together. Their relationship was strong. The topic was a little sensitive, and the atmosphere was tense. They needed to ease up. Lu Shi was not the only one who thought so. Jiang Pengji agreed. It was just that, drinking wine while drinking egg custard, that was really too much. Besides, Lu Lanting's body was still that of an underage girl. Was it really okay to drink? It turned out that she was thinking too much. Lu Shi said he was going to cook, but he only knew how to make egg custard because the steps were simple. As for drinking, he only knew how to make pear blossom wine. The alcohol content was so low that Jiang Pengji could drink more than 10 jars without getting drunk. After only a few cups, Lu Shi's cheeks were already tinged with a slightly tipsy red. She looked down at the wine cup and then at Lu Shi. How could he get drunk? She didn't know that because Gu Min believed that alcohol could damage the liver, Lu Shi had isolated himself from alcohol and tobacco since he was a child. Before he turned 20, he would only drink wine on his wedding night. Later on, when he socialized with officials, he would drink tea instead. Now that Gu Min was gone, he would occasionally drink a few cups. A person's tolerance for alcohol depended on both talent and training. Lu Shi didn't have the talent, nor did he train. His body wasn't in good shape, and he was exhausted by the affairs of Hu County a few years ago. Even a few cups of low-alcohol pear blossom wine would make him slightly tipsy. As the saying went, it wasn't the wine that intoxicated him, but the wine that intoxicated him. Lu Shi deliberately wanted to get drunk, and no one could stop him. After drinking a few more cups, he was already a little dizzy. His eyes were a little red from being drunk, and his eyes were a little red. He and Jiang Pengji sat on the veranda in the courtyard. Your mother loved the pear trees in the courtyard. She often took care of them. The pear wine of the Lu residence became a must-have for guests. Once upon a time, there was a swing under this tree. Your eldest brother was once in her arms, sitting on the swing and laughing happily. Even though the meaning of the pear tree was not good, Gu Min liked it. Lu Shi took advantage of the fact that he was slightly tipsy and supported his forehead with his hand. Hot tears rolled down his cheeks. He passed away when he was only 2 years old. Your mother's body was weak, and I didn't want her to have multiple pregnancies, lest it hurt her body and her mind. After that, I raised her for 4 years before I had you and your second brother. Who knew that he would drown in a pond when he was 4 years old? Ever since you were born, your mother did everything herself. She taught you not to talk to strangers, not to go to the water, and even to avoid the rocks. She was so careful, but she still fell into her trap. Lu Shi's eyes were filled with hatred and murderous intent as he spoke of the past. Lanting, this woman in the backyard looks charming, but she's even more venomous than a snake or scorpion. Her ruthlessness is breathtaking. Jiang Pengji sipped her wine as she analyzed all the information she had gathered so far. Both of Lu Lanting's brothers were killed by the woman in the backyard. Lu Shi knew who the woman was, but he couldn't take revenge on her. He was even restrained by her, so he had to be careful. Then, what was the motive for harming people? Could it be that she liked Lu Shi and killed his child out of jealousy? Jiang Pengji secretly glanced at Lu Shi. He was handsome, and even middle-aged, he still looked elegant. He was even more mature and charming than the hairless kids. If it was a crime of passion, wouldn't it have been better to kill Gu Min? Gu Min, on the other hand, died of illness due to exhaustion. Lu Shi was slightly drunk. He squinted his eyes and looked very drunk. How can my daughter be like those mediocre women, practicing in a man's backyard? Jiang Pengji listened quietly. She didn't want to argue with a drunkard. She should be practicing with those men. Jiang Pengji almost choked on her wine and spat it out. Cheap father, have you forgotten your gender? Encouraging their daughter to kill her male compatriots like this, was there still any love for her compatriots? Feng Huayu is beautiful, but he is old-fashioned and vicious. He has beautiful wives and concubines at home, but he is not a good match. Jiang Pengji squinted at him. According to her observation, Feng Jin was just a chick. He had never taken a girl for a plunger. How could he have beautiful wives and concubines? Su Xiaoyu is beautiful, but he is rebellious and not easy to tame. He is an ingrate and not a good match. Jiang Pengji didn't understand. What did their character have to do with beauty? Shouldn't he reflect on himself when he's so obsessed with looks? She waited for Lu Shi to continue his drunken rampage, but he paused and turned his head to stare at Jiang Pengji. His eyes seemed to be shining. His movement was very sudden. If she was a timid person, she might have burst into tears and been scared out of her wits. Lu Shi was tipsy. Lanting, what do you think of Cheng Yumo from Langya? Although he is a few years older than you, he is gentle and cautious. Who is Cheng Yumo? She was a little suspicious, but according to the characteristics of Feng Jin and Su Ku, Cheng Yumo was probably young and handsome. Not interested. Never heard of him. Then, what about Han Wenbin from Langya? She is young and beautiful, and her heart is exquisite. She carries herself with awe-inspiring righteousness. Is this cheap father trying to be a pimp? Thinking about what Lu Shi had said, Jiang Pengji couldn't help but sympathize with the youths who were targeted by him. Lu Shi sighed and said regretfully, why doesn't Lanting like it? Probably because they are not beautiful enough. Although she hadn't seen them before, they were all men. Their looks were definitely not good enough for her. She was obsessed with looks. It seemed that Lu Shi was also obsessed with looks, but she was more picky about it. The pupil had surpassed the master. Beautiful, Lu Shi tilted his head and thought for a long time. Many names floated in his muddled brain. Ever since he had his daughter, he had been thinking about marrying into the family. His daughter could not get married anyway. Not even a chance. No windows. Chapter 88. If he couldn't marry into her family, it would be better to follow his previous plan of marrying a wife and concubines, but secretly marrying a man to carry on the family line. The future Emperor Chen of the Jiang dynasty should be so willful and domineering. Even if she had 3 husbands and 4 attendants, others had to shut up. It was like a mother beating her son. There was no reason at all. No matter what, she couldn't let those jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards take advantage of her. Therefore, Lu Shi continued to recommend her with all his might, trying to get her to accept his recommendation. Beautiful? I have a candidate. How about Langya's Wei Zixiao? He was born with a romantic charm and looks like a beautiful woman. He is the immortal Gu Shi. Lu Shi raised his eyebrows at Jiang Pengji. His actions seemed frivolous and meaningful, as if all men knew. If it had been someone else who made that gesture and gaze, a perverted expression would have appeared on their faces. However, it was Lu Shi. It had to be said that this was a world where looks mattered the most. When he made that gesture, it had a sense of elegance that made people's hearts sway. Jiang Pengji was embarrassed. She smiled and said, "Why are they all from Langya?" It made all the men in the world, except for those from Langya, look like they were dead. It seemed that her father was really drunk. It is said that Hejian County attracts all the beauties in the world, and Langhuan gathers the literary talents of the human world. Most of the noble ladies in Hejian County are from noble families. They are famous for their beauty and are praised in history books. Langya and Ganning County are full of wise counselors and ministers. They are the places where literary talents gather. Dongqing is the weakest of the 5 countries, but the other 4 countries see it as a thorn in their side. Isn't it because the 3 counties have many talented people? Lu Shi clapped his hands and laughed. Only those outstanding men are worthy of my son's beauty. Didn't Amin say that 2 smart and outstanding people will give birth to even more outstanding offspring? Jiang Pengji smiled and did not say anything. She poured wine and sipped on it. Not long after, Lu Shi, who was sitting on the other side of the table, breathed smoothly and fell asleep. The pear blossoms in the courtyard fell with the night wind, and some naughtily fell into his hair. Sigh, I'm already drunk. Jiang Pengji finished the remaining jars of pear blossom wine and looked at the sky. She got up and gently carried Lu Shi, whose cheeks were red from sleep. Although he was an adult man, his weight was unimaginably light. It was as if his entire body was so thin that only a few bones remained. No wonder his head hurt so much when he woke up. Drinking too much water would make one tired. Second Lang Jun came to pay his respects this morning, but he didn't let us disturb you when he saw you were sleeping soundly. Lu Shi was silent. Some scenes flashed through his mind. His face turned pale, and he held back the urge to touch his forehead. His image as a noble father. Wasn't it all gone now? The maid lowered her head. She didn't dare to look above Lu Shi's chest. She kept a safe distance from him, so she didn't see Lu Shi's conflicted expression. He looked like he was smiling, but he wasn't. He looked like he was crying, but he wasn't. In other families, this kind of personal maid who served the master of the house would most likely be taken in when the mistress was unwell. Even if she didn't have a proper title, her status would definitely be different from that of an ordinary maid. It could be said that she had flown up the branches and turned into a phoenix. But this rule didn't apply to the Lu family. At least, it didn't work on Lu Shi. The elders in the house all knew that. You can leave. I need some time alone. He really needed some time alone. Being carried by his young daughter like a princess, he felt that his image as a father had collapsed. When the maid left and the door was closed, Lu Shi mumbled to himself in front of his wife's memorial tablet. Is this the chi attack that you mentioned, Amin? Outside the house, a few maids quietly left. One of them was beautiful and lively. She had been bought into the Lu family for less than half a year, but she was already full of vitality. Sister Tong, the master has been back for a few days. Why hasn't he gone to the backyard? The maidservant who was addressed as Sister Tong was an elder in the Lu residence. She was also a first-class maidservant who served Lu Shi. She was only in her early 20s, but she always wore a straight face. She wore no makeup, and she looked gloomy to everyone. The color of her clothes was also dark and gloomy. Chapter 89. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Master, you're just a maid. You have no right to comment on the affairs of the inner courtyard. Tong Sanyang's face was taut as she coldly sized up the little girl from head to toe, clearly seeing through the little girl's delusions. The maid's face turned pale, but she didn't dare to talk back to Tong Sanyang. Before Lu Shi came back, she had been in charge of all the affairs of the main courtyard. She wasn't a steward, but she was more like a steward. Even the old steward liked Tong Sanyang, saying that she was efficient and capable. The maid whispered timidly, "I'm just worried. I heard that the place where Master came from is a barren land. Caring for Master? That's Madam's business. What does it have to do with you?" Tong Sanyang was just short of direct sarcasm. Her eyes were filled with impatience and disdain. She had thought that the maid was a lively and lovely girl, but she was also an idiot with a big heart. The maid was about to defend herself when Tong Sanyang said bluntly, "I know what you're thinking. Everyone has their own ambitions. You have your own legs. If you want to climb into the master's bed, who can stop you? I'm just giving you a piece of advice. If you don't want to die, give up." With that, Tong Sanyang snorted coldly and left with light steps. She was fast, but not disorderly. Another idiot. Why didn't she use her brain to think about why all the maids in the mansion, regardless of their age, except for the few in the second Langjuan's courtyard, all wore plain makeup and didn't even dare to wear a hairpin? Why were their clothes made of good material, but not bright colors? Did she really think that the Lu family was like other rich men who would lose their minds after being teased by a woman? As she thought about it, Tong Sanyang couldn't help but recall a scene from many years ago. Even after so many years, those memories hadn't faded. She remembered the scene where the second Lang Jun had ordered his servants to be beaten to death. It was a different scene with a different protagonist, but it was all the same bloody scene. When the late madam passed away, Master followed the rules of etiquette. After the deadline, the old lady secretly sent a few girls who looked similar to the late madam, hoping that they could ease the grief in Master's heart and persuade him to remarry as soon as possible. And the result? Hee. Among them, the one who resembled the late wife was willing to throw away her pride. She took off all her clothes and wrapped herself in a thin quilt to seduce him. She even reached out to second Lang Jun, which caused second Lang Jun, who was already weak, to fall ill and almost die. What happened to the maid in the end? Didn't the old master order people to cut off his entire face and beat him to death? Everyone said that the second son of the Lu family, Lu Shi, was gentle and affectionate, as if he would never get angry. But who knew how ruthless this man could be when he decided to be? He hated the fact that the woman had seduced him with a face that resembled his late wife's. He hated the fact that she had used such a despicable method to murder his second Lang Jun. After the incident, he ordered his men to cut off her face and remove the thin quilt that had been covering her body. He wanted her to be beaten to death naked in the main courtyard. At the time, Tong Sanyang was still young, but she had witnessed that scene with all the maids in the estate. It had become a nightmare to this day. Fortunately, the old madam had arrived in time and was skillful enough to prevent Lu Shi's reputation from being cruel and heartless. After that incident, no one in the entire Lu family had the guts to seduce Lu Shi. Every single one of them wished that they could not wear any makeup. They chose the most mature and mature clothes, and they could not look at the head of the house with their eyes above their necks. All those pretentious actions and expressions of wanting to say something had to be put away. After all, no one would complain about living too long. Tong Sanyang's face was cold and hard. Her eyes seemed to be dripping with ice. Tong Sanyang had left in a hurry, so she did not realize that their conversation had fallen into the ears of a third person. That person was none other than Jiang Pengji. She was sitting on a fake mountain, dressed in a comfortable brown dress. She swung her legs and looked in that direction with a faint smile on her face. She had originally wanted to find a quiet place to meditate and try to pick up where she had left off. Perhaps it was because of the rich experience from her previous life, but Jiang Pengji meditated for the first time in her life. She quickly got on the right track. A wisp of ethereal mental strength surrounded her body and greatly enhanced her 5 senses. She entered a mysterious state of spiritual emptiness. Although the previous fusion of martial strength was a bit of a cheat, the benefits were not limited to a little increase in martial strength. Not only did her martial strength recover a little, but her mental strength also recovered a lot. She had barely reached the baseline of mental training. The scientific name for mental training was meditation and meditation. It was a training method that the Federation had developed after they entered the interstellar era. When one's mental strength reached a certain level, it could trigger a qualitative change in the body's genes and further strengthen the body. Jiang Pengji did not expect to hear the conversation between Tong Sanyang and the little servant girl. The content of the conversation made her not know whether to laugh or cry. Lu Shi was indeed very young in her era, but in this era, he was old enough to be a grandfather. Yes, if Lu Lanting's eldest brother had not died young, he would have been old enough to find a wife and have children. In other words, Lu Shi was already half a step into the grandfather's generation. Jiang Pengji watched Tong Sanyang's silhouette as she left. She saw the angry expression on the little servant girl's face. Jiang Pengji's lips curled into a faint smile. No matter the era, power is the most attractive thing a man has. Jumping off the fake mountain, Jiang Pengji went straight to her courtyard. She was greeted by Takshu's indignant face. Lang Jun, why did you go out in this outfit? Takshu was holding a pine green leather cloak in her arms. It was embroidered with delicate cloud patterns and pine leaves. Seeing that the missing Jiang Pengji had returned, she quickly went forward to put it on her. This is not what you should wear. Jiang Pengji did not mind. Clothes are made for people to wear. Why should I wear them? Takshu did not raise her head. This is not suitable for Lang Jun. Jiang Pengji did not refute. Instead, she obediently put on the clothes that Takshu handed to her. Even though the clothes covered her tightly and the cloak on the outside was spacious and the sleeves fluttered when the wind blew, it still could not hide the fact that there was wind underneath. Once again, she began to miss the second ruler in her previous life. Why couldn't Takshu prepare clothes for her that were not open? Her mother, a time traveler, had been in this world for so many years. Couldn't she lead the fashion and recommend clothes for others? Jiang Pengji remained expressionless. She changed into the clothes that Takshu thought suited her status. The wide sleeves made it easy for her to go for a walk. After confirming that there were no problems, she let the system open the streaming room. In less than 2 seconds, the screen was filled with bullet screens that blinded her. Zhuangxia Weiguan, damn, I finally made it in. It's so hard to get a seat in this streaming room. Xiangxiang Dong Dong, same to the previous post. It took me more than 2 hours to get a seat and see the legendary streamer. Chapter 90. Fatty Big C, bro, it's good enough to get it. Can you imagine 8 people in a dorm watching the stream together? Paid axing, speaking of which, the host's streaming room is too strange. There's a limit of 3,000 people. There are too many monks and not enough porridge. I wonder if there are some rich people lurking around and giving the host a few 9-5 supremes to increase the limit. Hit me if you don't agree, it's useless. The host's streaming room is very strange. It's different from the rules of streaming apps. Jiang Pengji looked at the complaints and discussions on the screen. She raised her eyebrows and sent a bullet screen. Host V, don't worry, everyone. The live streaming room limit has been put on the agenda. She posted the content of the semi-interactive and fully interactive streaming modes. Host V, I'm now collecting the content of the fully interactive streaming mode. You can tag whatever you want to see, and I'll select the content to vote for. As for the content of the semi-interactive streaming mode, I'll open it when there's a suitable opportunity. As there was a new group of viewers in the streaming room, Jiang Pengji simply explained in detail what happened in the streaming room. Fatty Big C, he, I want to see the host go to a brothel. I heard there are many high-quality girls in this room. Maybe it was because of the culture of modern society, many people were more sensitive to these special industries and were more curious about them. Fatty Big C started the discussion, and the screen was filled with comments about visiting a brothel and looking at girls. Paydaxing, that's not right. I heard the host is a girl. Are you guys crazy to let a girl go to a brothel in ancient times? There are all sorts of people there. If the host gets bullied, will you take responsibility? What a bunch of troublemakers. There were some who wanted to cause trouble, and there were also some righteous young men. Apart from paydaxing, there was also a small group of viewers who supported him. After all, women in ancient times were very particular about their reputation. If an unmarried girl went to a brothel, even if nothing happened, her reputation would be ruined. Jiang Pengji quietly watched the fun and didn't get involved. However, she also wanted to go. After all, there were many beautiful girls. But Lu Shi's father probably wouldn't want to see his daughter go to a brothel. She silently looked at the bullet screen for a while, then turned her head and said to Takshu with her usual expression, "Go get Su-ku here." Xuanmei's eyes lit up when she heard Su-ku's name. She looked at Jiang Pengji with yearning. Takshu was initially reluctant. She did not have a good impression of Su-ku. However, when she saw Sunmei's reaction, she frowned and immediately accepted the task. The place where Su-ku lived was not far from Jiang Pengji's courtyard. Takshu was efficient. She quickly brought him over. "Let's go," Jiang Pengji said to Su-ku. It was the first official training for the servants. She felt that it would be better for her to be there to hold the fort. Su-ku's small stature was not threatening at all. It was different from the day before. Other than Jiang Pengji's horse carriage, there were 2 bullock carts with heavy loads following behind. Seeing this, Su-ku could not help but ask suspiciously, "Lang Jun, what are you doing?" Jiang Pengji gave a simple explanation. "Since we're going to train, we can't lack the necessary items. These are prepared for their training. I also asked the sewing room to make a lot of sandbags, but the cloth is rough and normal sand will seep out easily, so I chose dry clay." Su-ku tilted his head and thought about the pattern Jiang Pengji had drawn. He thought about the large amount of wood she had bought the day before. "The wood you bought yesterday was also for the training?" Jiang Pengji did not hide it. "Yes. It's just that those items are more delicate. The carpenter said it would take 10 days to half a month to produce the finished products. It's still a problem if they can't be used. If they can't be used, we need to find more suitable wood or substitutes." Su-ku recalled the strange pattern he had seen. He was a little confused. "I heard that the Lu's woodworking workshop is one of the best in Hejin County. The craftsmen there are also skilled and experienced. I wonder what it is that even they have to spend so much effort on." Jiang Pengji tilted her head and looked at him. She said strangely, "Have you ever seen a servant patrolling the courtyard empty-handed?" Since the carpenters were rushing to make them, they were naturally weapons that were more convenient to use. Su-ku's face changed. "Privately made weapons? Of course not. It's just a crossbow that I improved. It can be used for hunting. Your previous words have reminded me that not everyone has the strength to draw a heavy bow. Even a strong man, if he doesn't eat his fill for a long time, he won't even be able to stand properly, let alone shoot an arrow. Not everyone has the ability to shoot from 100 steps away. If you want to achieve this, you need to train hard for a long time. The efficiency is too low." She did not elaborate, but Su-ku understood the hidden meaning in her words. Was his Lang Jun hinting that the crossbows she had asked the craftsman to rush to make could easily shoot a crossbow for those who lacked strength and eyesight? If there really is such a weapon, Lang Jun should choose the craftsman well in case the secret is leaked. Su-ku looked calm, but his heart was in turmoil. Was there really such a magical thing in the world? Jiang Pengji nodded her head. In this era of cold weapons, the emergence of any advanced weapon could achieve the unexpected effect of changing the outcome of a war. Although she did not care about these things, she could not let others take advantage of them. I'm not a naive person. For such an important thing, I will naturally find a reliable person. Most people would be naked in front of her when they were completely unprepared. She knew whether or not they could be used. Naive? What does that mean? Su Ku nodded at first, but then he was confused. Jiang Pengji explained with a straight face, silly and naive means unreliable. Many viewers in the streaming room felt sorry for Jiang Pengji as she bullied Su Ku. Menzugu, #laughter cry. Streamer, it's not nice of you. Don't bully the cute baby. Su Ku was very similar to a certain young male idol in their era. That young male idol's fans called him cute baby. Ulshuyanfeng Mian, #goodbye. I've lived for a long time, but this is the first time I know that naive means unreliable. Qing Shan Weishua Bai Tu, someone help. The streamer's language teacher's coffin is about to collapse. Jiang Pengji secretly shrugged. She had learned the word naive from the bullet screen of the streaming audience. How could she be blamed if she misunderstood it? Su Ku listened to the explanation and said seriously, Lang Jun is not naive. Chapter 91. These people can be the first group leaders. If they don't make the cut, we'll eliminate them in the next selection test. Su Ku took the list, glanced at it, and remembered it. Lang Jun, are you really going to lead them to kill the bandits after the training? Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows, and her eyes were sharp. Of course. Do you think I'm joking? Su Ku shook his head. He had seen Jiang Pengji's methods, so he didn't think she was the kind of person who would joke. I don't mean that. It's just that most of the bandits around Hejin County are hiding in the deep mountains, and it's hard to find them. If we get entangled with them, I'm afraid we'll be at a disadvantage. Although he didn't say it directly, Su Ku wasn't optimistic about it. Let's not talk about that. Those bandits are all desperados. They have nothing to worry about, so they're naturally cruel and bloodthirsty. But those servants don't have the heart to die. It was said that the unreasonable were afraid of the reckless. A group of servants who had no experience in killing had little chance of winning against the bloodthirsty bandits. There's always a first time for everything. What's so scary about killing? Jiang Pengji glanced at Su Ku. Although he was young and skinny, he had chopped people to death with a hatchet. Since she said so, it was obvious how determined she was. Su Ku wouldn't ask for a rebuff and continue to persuade her. The training process and specific programs were written in detail in the booklet. They were all basic physical training, so it wasn't difficult to do. Su Ku gathered everyone together. First, he picked out a few corporals, and then he divided the rest of the servants into groups. The whole process was quiet. The group of people were as obedient as little chicks, waiting for their mother hen to assign tasks. Surprisingly, no one dared to make a sound and cause trouble. What a joke. Did they dare to make a sound? Yesterday, the fiend who single-handedly defeated more than 10 of them was staring at them from the side. Who would want to live too long? Thinking about the scene from the day before, the places where Jiang Pengji beat them still hurt. Because the training environment was too simple, the training programs were naturally not fancy, so basic physical training programs were very common. Ulshui Infeng Mian, it feels like an ancient military training? Patrick Starr, this is much more difficult than military training. When I was in school, military training was either running or walking in a square formation. It was actually quite easy. As for these people, after a period of training, they would be sent to suppress bandits. If they were not careful, they would lose their lives. Fatty Big C, I just finished military training a month ago. It's much easier than them. Full mouth of dog food, but is this training useful? Why did it feel so unreliable? Tudu Faccio, it can't be like that. How can the host be so unreliable? How could Jiang Pengji not have considered these things that even the live stream viewers knew? Pure physical training could only make these servants stronger and stronger, but it was not enough to fight the bandits to the death with just this. After all, they were the embryonic form of an orderly troop, not a pile of loose sand that fought on their own. They didn't need powerful individual combat abilities, but they needed to learn how to cooperate in small groups. Running 10,000 meters 3 times a day doesn't mean that you can finish it with all your might. This method is the dumbest. You will run out of energy one by one, and when you reach the finish line, you will be too tired to get up. Let's say you are a speedy troop that received orders to support a battlefield. If you follow this method, even if you arrive in time, you will be a tired troop with no combat ability. Jiang Pengji watched these people run around several ridges for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. Even though they were panting from exhaustion and their legs felt like they were filled with lead, none of them completed the task. She frowned under the sun, and Su Ku was afraid that she would be angry. Although he knew that Jiang Pengji's words made sense, Su Ku felt that her standards were too high. He tried to persuade her, "Lang Jun, don't be angry. After all, these people are training for the first time. They will not be used to it. If we give them some time, I think, Xiaoyu, this has nothing to do with whether they are used to it or not. I know what you want to say. They are all bought by the broker house, so their physical condition is not as good as those strong men who have been farming for a long time. Because they don't eat much rice, their strength is not as good as others, so it is reasonable that they can't finish the prescribed distance. But I want to say that this is not correct, because they don't know how to run. It would be strange if they could last 10,000 meters if they sped up from the beginning." Jiang Pengji tried to explain in words that everyone could understand. Long-distance running not only tests physical strength and endurance, but also other things. Blindly running will only waste the body's energy. The best situation is to maintain a uniform speed and use it reasonably. Not only that, but they also have to learn how to maintain a reasonable breathing rhythm while running. That kind of rapid breathing will make people more tired. And the range of running, like that person who wanted to swing his arm to the sky, is ridiculously wrong. More importantly, the running posture was too eye-catching. This was the most basic physical training. There would be all kinds of weight-bearing events in the future, and it would be even more tiring. Looking at these guys, there was only one word in Jiang Pengji's mind: chicken. Thinking back, even when she was selected to be trained in a low-level military school when she was still a turnip, the training intensity was more than 10 times higher than these people. She steadily withstood it. These men were all like soft-footed shrimps. They couldn't even compete with her when she was 5 or 6 years old. Chicken. If you don't train well now, you will have no bones left in the future. Jiang Pengji sneered and concluded. Su Ku, who was beside her, was as silent as a chicken, and he did not try to persuade her. He understood that Jiang Pengji did not use the standard of a normal servant to ask these people, but the standard of a tiger, wolf, and bear soldier. As the saying goes, speed is the most important thing in war. For an army, they could easily travel hundreds of miles in a day. It was okay to rush to help or to launch a surprise attack. If they were in such a state, they would not be able to arrive in time even if they risked their lives. When the time came, the people and horses would be exhausted, and they would be ambushed by the enemy who was waiting for them. Of course, this once again proved how ambitious his Lang Jun was. She really wanted to cause trouble. One by one, get up. Lying on the ground and panting like dogs. Don't you think it's ugly? Jiang Pengji looked at them disdainfully and chased them up from the ground like she was chasing ducks. Her movements were not gentle at all. Looking at these people getting up in 2s and 3s, although their faces were ugly, they were not at their limit. She was slightly satisfied. When they are done with their training, I will buy some younger ones. The old will guide the new. That way, your task will be lighter. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.